I love writing and often find myself conjuring up story ideas. Many of my ideas stem from real-life experiences or from asking what if questions about everyday scenarios. They say truth is stranger than fiction, and I'd have to agree. A few years ago, I had one of those what if moments during my usual drive home from work. As I approached the circular exit ramp, a common feature on Michigan freeways, I found myself imagining something unusual. The center of the ramp was an open, marshy area, with cattails and tall grasses growing thickly in the middle. There wasn't anything eerie about it, but a thought struck me. What if a body were hidden in there? Immediately, my imagination kicked into gear. Why would a body be there? A murder story didn't make sense. The area was too public and exposed. An accident seemed even less likely. This was a freeway, after all, and accidents don't go unnoticed. The idea seemed like a dead end for a plotline, so I shrugged it off by the time I got home. But then it happened again. The next day, as I approached the same spot, the same thought popped into my head. What if a body were lying in there? Day after day, every time I reached that exit, it was like flipping a switch. The idea always came back, clear and persistent. Yet I had no logical reason to think about it, and I never did anything beyond shaking it off. This went on for months. Then one day, while driving home as usual, I saw flashing lights. My exit ramp was blocked by police cars and a large black van. As I got closer, I noticed the words Mobile Command Unit painted on the van's side. For a moment, I wondered if there had been a prison escape from the facility up the road. But the truth was far more unsettling. Yes, you guessed it, someone had found a body. The news the next day confirmed it. A worker cutting down the cattails and tall grasses had discovered skeletal remains. Later reports revealed that the remains belonged to a man who had gone missing the previous winter. During a snowstorm, his car broke down on the freeway, and he abandoned it. Somehow, he ended up in the marshy area at the center of the ramp. The snow covered him as he collapsed, and as winter turned to spring, the cattails shielded him from view. By summer, no one realized he was there, until the worker stumbled upon him. I couldn't stop wondering. Had his ghost been trying to get my attention all those months? Was I the only one who could hear him, even if I didn't understand how to listen? And why me? I've never thought of myself as sensitive to ghosts. If anything, I assumed I was immune because I grew up in a haunted house. Maybe living among spirits from such a young age dulled my senses to their presence. Or maybe my imagination plays a role. Often, when I'm writing, it feels as though I'm channeling words from somewhere else. Some of my best work surprises even me. I'll read back phrases like, milked from the moon, or minnows swimming skyward, and wonder, where did that even come from? Could my active imagination be the reason I picked up on that ghost's desperate cries, even if only subconsciously? So I feel terrible. He tried so hard to make me hear him, and I ignored him for months. But here's the strangest part. After the day with the police cars and the mobile command unit, the idea switch stopped. That exit ramp became just another exit ramp. The persistent thought never returned. Sometimes, I still wonder, was that man trying to reach me all along? Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. This story isn't dramatic or chilling, but it's the kind of experience I have every so often. I imagine many of you on YGS can relate, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments. Bill was a slightly built, older man with a nervous twitch and a stammer. He'd worked at our company for decades longer than I had, in a different department. While I didn't know much about his personal life, I knew he was divorced, though not by choice. His office was down the hall from mine, so we frequently ran into each other. We'd chat about work occasionally, and I found him to be a kind and sensitive person. Amanda, on the other hand, was at least 20 years younger than Bill. She'd come to the U.S. alone as a teenager, spoke with an exotic accent, and had a frail, fragile appearance. She harbored bitter feelings toward her family, though I didn't know the specifics of their estrangement. She often spoke about feeling abandoned and alone. Initially, Amanda seemed to admire Bill for his knowledge. He was an expert on a subject she was passionate about, and they spent hours in conversation. Sharing an office brought them closer, and soon they were going out for meals, attending concerts, and spending a lot of time together. While their growing friendship raised a few eyebrows, no one thought much of it, at least not at first. A foreboding feeling. One winter, Bill had been out sick for a few days. When he returned, he stopped by my office to chat about a book we both liked. He looked miserable and had a nasty cough. Concerned, I asked if he'd been to a doctor. "Oh, I'm fine," he said with a smile. "I'm actually getting over walking pneumonia, but I'm much better now." He seemed cheerful, but I couldn't shake the unease that crept over me. One of my unwelcome abilities is recognizing a certain look on someone's face that signals death is near. It's hard to describe, but it's a haunting feeling I can't ignore. That day, I saw it in Bill. The very next day, Amanda found Bill collapsed on the floor of his apartment. He had died of a heart condition no one, not even Amanda, knew he had. The pneumonia had stressed his lungs and heart beyond what his body could handle. Amanda's grief. Bill's death shocked everyone, but Amanda's grief was especially intense and public. At his funeral, she arrived late, sobbing uncontrollably and leaning on the arm of an usher. She joined Bill's ex-wife and adult children in the front pew, an uninvited gesture that clearly upset them. Later, at the gravesite, she fainted dramatically. In the months that followed, she frequently burst into tears at work, often throwing herself into the arms of startled colleagues. I had my own thoughts about their relationship. Bill was deeply religious and likely viewed Amanda as a close friend or even a surrogate daughter, especially since his own daughter rarely visited him. Amanda, however, seemed to see their bond differently. One thing was certain. Bill had truly cared for her, even after his passing. Bill's presence. One gray, rainy afternoon, I was chatting with a coworker in the hallway outside my office. My back was to the far end of the hall, near the office Bill and Amanda had shared. As we talked, I heard soft footsteps approach from behind. A hand grazed my shoulder, a friendly, familiar gesture, as though someone was acknowledging me as they walked by. But when I turned around, no one was there. The sensation was so real that I was sure someone physical had been nearby. My friend, unnerved by my reaction, laughed nervously and said, "Maybe it was Bill saying hi." I immediately knew she was right. From that day on, I could feel Bill's presence intensely whenever I passed his old office. It was as though he was straining to get my attention. Though I was fascinated, I was also terrified. Paranormal encounters have always scared me, despite my curiosity. Still, Bill had been a good man in life, and I knew that hadn't changed in death. Finally, I realized what he wanted. Amanda's grief was keeping him tied to this world. I approached her delicately, explaining that her overwhelming sorrow was preventing Bill's spirit from moving on. He was worried about how her grief was affecting her health and wanted her to find peace, helping Amanda heal. I suspected Amanda was battling deeper issues, including anorexia, so I encouraged her to seek counseling with a licensed therapist we both knew, a deeply spiritual person. Took time, but therapy began to help her. Over the months, her complexion improved, and she stopped wearing all black. She could say Bill's name without breaking down and eventually stopped visiting his grave daily. Within a year, Amanda was noticeably healthier, and her emotional wounds began to heal. As for Bill, his presence gradually faded. I still pass his old office every workday, but it no longer feels like he's there. I was never a firm believer in ghosts or the supernatural. Even now, I'm not fully convinced, but I'm much more open to the possibility after an experience I had about 3 years ago. My family has a cabin in St. Helens, Michigan, where I spent a lot of my childhood. It's a peaceful place, but I've always had a natural fear of the woods at night. Not because I believed in ghosts or monsters, but because I didn't like the idea of what could be out there, hidden in the dark. One weekend, my best friend, my sister, and I decided to take a trip up to the cabin to unwind. I was 19 at the time, and my dad had left behind some booze from the previous weekend. Sitting by the fire, drinks in hand, I started feeling overly confident, making myself out to be braver than I really was. That's when they challenged me. Go alone to a specific spot deep in the woods, a place tied to local lore. This spot was supposedly the site of an old logging camp from the early 1900s. It even had a single gravesite with a candle that, according to the legend, was always burning. My friends dared me to go there at night, light the candle if it wasn't already burning, and take a selfie by the grave. Feeling bold, I accepted the dare. The next night, at nightfall, I set out to find the gravesite. Took me about 45 minutes of driving and wandering in the dark to locate it. I passed it a few times because the candle wasn't lit, which, oddly enough, calmed me. Without the eerie glow of a perpetually burning candle, it just seemed like an ordinary, quiet spot in the woods. After finally finding the grave, I lit the candle, snapped my selfie, and started heading back to my car. That's when things took a turn. As I reached my car and prepared to leave, I thought I heard a man's voice in the distance. It wasn't loud, more like a muffled talking. A chill ran down my spine. The woods were too dark and too desolate for someone to be out there at that hour. Not wanting to give away my position, I stayed quiet and tried to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The clouds began to part, and the light of a 3/4 moon illuminated the pine forest around me. My instincts told me to leave, but curiosity held me back. Just as I was about to walk away, I heard a heavy thump, like the sound of something, or someone, falling out of a tree. My heart raced, but instead of running, I found myself walking toward the sound. I needed to know what was out there, the encounter. When I got closer, I saw the faint silhouette of a man walking in circles. It was unsettling. He moved without any sense of direction or purpose. Even stranger, his footsteps made no sound on the forest floor. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave, but I forced myself to call out. "Are you okay?" I shouted. The figure immediately reacted. He ran to a nearby tree, and it looked like he punched it or maybe slammed into it. Couldn't be sure. My adrenaline spiked, and I bolted for my car, running faster than I thought was possible. As I reached the car, a high-pitched scream pierced the air. It didn't sound human. The sound was sharp, unearthly, and unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and sped off without looking back. Aftermath. I never told anyone about the incident. For a long time, I didn't even allow myself to think about it. I wanted to forget it ever happened. Even now, it gives me chills, though I feel more comfortable sharing it now. I can't say for sure what I encountered that night. Maybe it was paranormal. Maybe it wasn't. But one thing I'm certain of, no ordinary person with any sense at all would be in the middle of those woods, at that spot, alone in the dark, doing what that figure was doing. Whenever I think about this experience, I wonder how many entities were actually watching us that day. What do you think? About 15 years ago, on a hot summer afternoon, my oldest son, Duncan, and his wife, Janice, stopped by for coffee. As we sat around the kitchen table chatting, Duncan told us about a house he and Janice were considering buying. I was immediately worried when he mentioned its location. A notoriously dangerous neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan, known for high crime rates, including drug activity and violence. At the time, Duncan and Janice were in their 20s and already had 4 kids. They were struggling financially, so when they heard about a quick path to homeownership, it was tempting. The deal came from a house flipper who bought condemned properties, made minimal repairs, and sold them for a profit. He offered Duncan an incredibly low price on a land contract if Duncan could get the house out of its red-tagged status by making it livable again. The house flipper didn't know, or wouldn't say, much about the property's history, except that it had been a drug house, raided by the police. Despite the low price, Duncan said he felt something off about the house and asked if we'd go with him to check it out. Paranormal things scare me, but I was too worried about Duncan and his family to refuse. Our group consisted of Duncan, Janice, my now deceased mother, my second oldest son, then in college, his friend, my husband, and me. We piled into 2 cars and drove to the house. The house was a dingy, 2-story structure with dented aluminum siding and some boarded-up windows. Built in the 1930s as a middle-class family home, it now looked neglected and foreboding. The yard was overgrown with weeds and littered with trash. We parked on the street, drawing the attention of neighbors who watched us intently from their porches. As we walked around to the back door, I felt an oppressive presence, as if something powerful and angry were watching us. The sensation hit me like walking into an electrified fence. Despite my fear, I followed the others into the house. Inside, the air felt heavy and ominous. The kitchen, dim and narrow, smelled of old cooking grease. I sensed the presence of an elderly woman cowering in a corner. Her gray hair was disheveled, and she wore a faded floral housecoat. She didn't feel threatening. In fact, she seemed subdued, as if she were afraid of the same thing that terrified me. We moved into what had likely been the formal dining room. The walls bore blank spaces where pictures once hung, and I noticed what looked like 3 bullet holes in the cracked drywall. A table near the window was hidden under trash bags. None of us wanted to know what was inside them. In this room, the oppressive atmosphere intensified. I felt the presence of a large, dangerous man standing nearby, glaring at us with fury. He appeared in my mind as a white man in his 30s, unshaven, with dark, shoulder-length hair. He wore a sleeveless shirt, what some call a wife-beater, and held a lit cigarette. His energy felt territorial and aggressive, as though he claimed this room as his own. We continued exploring the house together, sticking close as we moved through the main floor, up to the attic and back down again. None of us dared to go into the basement. One upstairs bedroom gave me chills, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Broken toys scattered across the floor suggested it had once been a child's room. In the closet, a Cub Scout uniform hung on a wire hanger. Scrawled on the wall in lopsided marker letters were the lyrics to Barney's theme song, "I love you, you love me, we're a happy family." Seeing those words in that bleak, broken room was jarring. It hinted at a life far removed from the innocent, cheerful world Barney represented. As we descended the narrow stairs to the main floor, my son suddenly stopped on the last step. "Be careful," he said. "Look at the floor." Spread out on the carpet in front of the staircase were several small, wallet-sized school photos of children. They were arranged in a rough fan shape, facing the stairs, as if deliberately placed for us to see. None of us remembered seeing them when we went upstairs. That was the final straw. We bolted for the cars, our earlier curiosity replaced with raw fear. Unsurprisingly, Duncan decided not to buy the house. We still talk about that drug house tour to this day. Some of us felt the oppressive, eerie presence intensely, while others, like my husband, who seems to repel paranormal activity, sensed nothing at all. To this day, I wonder how many entities were watching us in that house. What do you think? To share my first true encounter, we need to go back to when I was about 6 years old. My family had just moved into my grandma's old house, and my sisters loved joking that the house was haunted by her spirit. Being 6, I believed it completely. Over time, I started seeing flashes of light in the shape of a woman. As the youngest of my parents' children, I had never met my grandma. She had passed away before I was born. Seeing these flashes as a kid freaked me out, but no one believed me when I told them. Later that same year, my dad went to jail, leaving just my mom, my 2 older sisters, and me in the house. Occasionally, the front door would swing open on its own, and my mom would say, "Kids, say hello to Grandma." These incidents usually happened on family holidays like Easter, Thanksgiving, or Christmas. Even now, it still happens at Christmas. As the years went by, I became more accustomed to these strange occurrences. We lost several animals, mostly cats, and even my dog passed recently. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be happy that I've turned his collar into a decorative piece on my wall. Despite all this, those flashes of light have continued, even now that I'm 18. I'm not religious, but I know for a fact that there are spirits in my mom's house. By now, they've become normal to me. But what brought me here to share my story is something that happened recently. Something different. In the past few years, I've gotten into anime. A friend recommended one called Rosario plus Vampire, and a particular character caught my attention, the succubus. Curious, I decided to look up what a succubus was. When I learned more about it, I thought it would be a good idea, or at least interesting, to try and summon one. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it worked. I definitely summoned something. I knew there could be consequences, but here's what's been happening over the past week, and I need your advice. Every night, around 3 a.m., I experience what feels like my entire body locking up for a second or two, followed by cold shivers running down my spine. When I finally fall asleep, I feel as though I'm not alone in bed. To clarify, my stepbrother shares the room with me at my dad's house. But this is different. It's like someone else is lying next to me. My stepbrother says he hasn't noticed anything unusual. I've also been having very strange dreams. They're not nightmares, just unusual. For the first time in a while, I wake up feeling genuinely refreshed. Last night, I heard a woman's voice in my head telling me to listen to music I wouldn't normally choose. That same night, I dreamed of meeting a woman for the first time. The atmosphere in the dream felt heavy, like the air and gravity had changed. I wasn't myself at all. Normally, I'm a joker, always making smart remarks, but in the dream, I was serious, completely out of character for me. I'm not sure what's going on. Is this succubus waiting for me to be truly alone? Or is she just watching? I don't feel like I'm in immediate danger, but I don't know what to make of this. I joined the Detroit Fire Department in the summer of 1973 and was assigned to Ladder 15, one of the oldest companies on the west side of Detroit, Michigan. It was a proud moment for my family. My dad and grandfather were both thrilled that I had become a third-generation firefighter. They were doubly proud because my twin brother, Austin, graduated alongside me. Austin tragically lost his life in 2004, along with 6 other men from Ladder 24, while fighting a fire in an abandoned house. When I started at Ladder 15, we had an incredible station chief, Alan Hallows, name changed for privacy. Alan was nearing retirement but quickly became like family to all of us. He was kind, had a sharp sense of humor, and was known for his legendary lasagna. Alan treated every firefighter like they mattered, never pulling rank just because he was the chief. About 6 months into my time at the station, we were busy cleaning the trucks while Alan was inspecting the hoses. Suddenly, he collapsed right there in the truck bay. He had suffered a fatal heart attack. Alan's funeral was held with full honors, and we did everything we could to support his widow, Michelle, and their 3 children, Susan, Joanne, and Robert. The loss hit us hard. Alan was more than a chief. He was one of us. But it turned out Alan wasn't entirely done with us yet. Not long after his passing, odd things began happening around the station. For starters, every couple of weeks during night shifts, we'd smell Alan's lasagna in the kitchen. No one had been cooking lasagna, and the ovens were always empty and cold. The smell was unmistakable. Anyone who had tasted Alan's cooking would recognize it. The new chief, who took over Alan's office, had his own strange experiences. He complained that he couldn't sleep during night shifts because someone kept trying to climb into bed with him or push him out of it. He started locking the office door, wearing the key on a chain around his neck, and using an additional chain lock inside. The lock was an old-fashioned design that couldn't be easily copied. Yet the disturbances continued. Another quirk involved the chief's messy desk. He often left papers scattered everywhere, but when he stepped out, sometimes for a call or even just lunch, he'd return to find his desk perfectly neat with filing completed. No one else had access to his office, leaving us all scratching our heads. Other strange occurrences added to the mystery. Lights and TVs left on when we went out on calls would be turned off by the time we returned, even though the station was empty. The emergency dispatch room had calls answered and relayed to us, despite being locked and unoccupied. This was before we had a permanent dispatcher, so calls were temporarily forwarded to Alan's wife's home after his death. These ghostly answered calls stopped once a new dispatcher, Lorna Cassing, joined the station. Lorna had her own chilling experience. One day, after setting up for her shift, she stepped out to grab coffee. When she returned, she heard a man's voice answering a dispatch call. Panicked, she unlocked the door. She had the only key in the station at the time, and rushed in, but the room was empty. The caller on the line thanked that nice man, Alan, for taking the call. Lorna was shaken but eventually came to accept Alan's presence, much like the rest of us. Alan was occasionally seen, too. Some of us spotted him walking the halls from his office to the kitchen or truck bay, silently observing us as we cleaned the trucks or played pool during downtime. He stayed with us until Ladder 15 merged with 24 and 28. When I transferred to Ladder 24 and eventually became captain, Alan's presence seemed to fade from the old station. Ladder 15's building was later used as a mechanic's shop and ambulance station before being condemned and torn down. Now, an apartment building with a convenience store on the ground floor stands in its place. I often wonder if Alan moved on or if he lingers somewhere, perhaps watching over firefighters in the new station. His wife has since passed, and his son Robert continues the family legacy as a firefighter with Ladder 41 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I like to think Alan has found peace, perhaps cooking his famous lasagna in that great firehouse in the sky, joined by my dad, my pop, and my twin Austin. Alan was a remarkable man, a great chief, and a cherished friend. Those of us who had the privilege of knowing him still miss him deeply. I've had strange experiences for as long as I can remember. I'm 17 now, and while these events have been a regular part of my life, they've rarely scared me. Growing up in an older trailer park, my friends and I used to explore the paranormal with tape recorders, trying to explain the odd things that would happen to us. Once, when I was about 8, we had heavy metal pliers thrown at us from across a room, not once but several times. Each time, the pliers landed just 2 inches from our feet, always facing the same direction. Needless to say, I've been familiar with the paranormal for a long time. For the past 3 years, I've lived with my grandmother in an older apartment building for people over 62. It's not unusual for residents to pass away here, and since my grandmother has legal custody of me, I'm allowed to stay with her. From the very beginning, I've had strange experiences in this apartment. In my first few weeks, I was lying on the couch when I saw a black, human-shaped figure crouch and run from one side of the room to the other, disappearing through the wall. I often see similar shadowy figures standing near the dining room table at night when I grab a snack. My cat usually follows me when he hears my door open, and every time we encounter these shadows, he arches his back and hisses, the only times he ever hisses. These encounters haven't bothered me much, as the figures seemed indifferent to my presence. But about 7 months ago, something happened that stood out. One afternoon, I was home alone with my cat, a common occurrence, which might explain why I have more experiences than my grandmother or my mom, who only stays on weekends. I was in the kitchen when I heard my bedroom door unlatched, swing open, and slam shut. When I went to check, I found my lamp, usually unplugged, was plugged in. The windows were closed, and the door is difficult to open due to a faulty knob. I couldn't explain it, and neither could my skeptical grandmother. A few weeks later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my closet door repeatedly sliding open and closed. It went on for 20 minutes. Frustrated and unnerved, I moved to the living room to sleep. Thankfully, that particular incident hasn't happened again. For a while, things settled down, aside from the occasional shadow figure. Once, even my mom saw one. Then, about 2 weeks ago, the activity ramped up in ways I hadn't experienced before. The first truly frightening event happened while I was taking a shower. After turning off the water, the shower curtain suddenly slid open. There was no one there, but I noticed an indent in the curtain, about 4 feet off the floor, as though a hand were gripping it. I was home alone and terrified. I refused to go back into the bathroom until my grandmother came home 4 hours later. A week ago, I was in the bathroom at around 3 a.m. with my cat when we heard someone pacing outside the door. My cat became extremely alert, his ears perked and his body tense. We then heard the trash can being used, followed by footsteps stopping right outside the bathroom. The doorknob began to turn. Thinking it was my grandmother, I said, "Wait a minute, someone's in here." When I opened the door, there was no one there. My cat was still on edge, looking around the hallway as if trying to find the source. My grandmother was sound asleep. For the rest of the night, I heard footsteps outside my closed bedroom door until I finally managed to fall asleep. The most recent event happened just last night, again around 3 a.m. I was in the bathroom when I heard footsteps coming from my grandmother's room toward the door. The doorknob started turning, and I called out that the bathroom was occupied. This time, the knob kept jiggling before the door swung open. But again, there was no one there. These past 3 incidents have been some of the most disturbing experiences of my life. I don't know if this is something trying to get attention or if it's a poltergeist. My mother believes I'm more sensitive to these things, which could explain why I have so many encounters. Even my previously skeptical grandmother has come to accept that something strange is happening. I've been thinking about writing this down for a while now, wanting to capture it while the memories are still clear. Time has a way of stealing the details, and this experience has stayed with me all my life. When I was about 9 years old, in the mid-1990s, my mother remarried, and my brother and I moved into my stepfather's house. It was a 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a relatively rural township in southeast Michigan. The house, built in the late 1970s, seemed perfectly ordinary. Nothing about it hinted at what I would experience. I was excited at first because it was much larger than the tiny home I'd grown up in. But as time went on, I became increasingly uncomfortable in that house. It was at the dead end of a quiet street, at the bottom of a gentle hill, with only a few neighbors nearby. I dreaded coming home every day after school. As I approached the house, I refused to look at it, especially the windows. Instead, I stared at my feet, unlocked the garage door, and ran inside. Once inside, I avoided windows, mirrors, and the basement stairs. To distract myself until my brother came home an hour and a half later, I'd fixate on the TV. I didn't even read, though I loved books, because the silence made me uneasy. I avoided the hall bathroom whenever possible, opting for the master bath instead. At the time, I thought these feelings were just me being a scared kid, afraid of being alone. But as I got older, I realized I had never felt that level of unease in any other house. Even older and creepier ones my dad lived in after my parents divorced. The basement, like many basements, was another source of fear for me. It wasn't creepy by any conventional standard. It was fully finished with carpeting, bright lighting, and decor. It even had a bedroom, laundry room, game closet, office, TV room, and an open play area. Despite this, I avoided it whenever I could. One summer, when I was 12, I agreed to play in the basement with my brother Alex, 10, and my stepsister Sarah, 9. It was a hot day, and my parents refused to use the air conditioning to save money. We were playing school with some old desks my mom had, and I was pretending to be the teacher. At one point, the room grew quiet as we all focused on the game. That's when I heard someone running down the stairs. The stairs were carpeted and shaped in an L, so from where we sat, only the landing and bottom 3 steps were visible. The running was fast, but the steps were light. I glanced up to see who it was. A young boy with red hair ran down the last 2 steps, crossed the room between my siblings and me, and disappeared into the far end of the basement, where the TV was. I didn't just see the boy. I heard the steps, felt the vibrations on the floor, and even felt a breeze as he passed. My immediate thought was that it must be Sam, the red-headed youngest son of our neighbors, who had somehow wandered into the house. "Sam!" I called out. There was no response. My siblings looked at me, confused. I walked to the other side of the basement, calling his name again. There was no answer, and no sign of him anywhere. Still convinced it was Sam, I checked every corner. He was gone. My brother and stepsister stared at me, baffled, as I tried to explain what I saw. "Sam's here," I said. "Didn't you see him run down here?" They shook their heads, clearly thinking I was imagining things. Then, as we were packing up the game, I turned to see both of them standing frozen, pale and wide-eyed. "What's wrong?" I asked. My brother replied, "We saw him. We just saw him too." That was it. We bolted up the stairs, leaving the rest of the mess behind. When I told my mom about it, she brushed it off. Years later, after we'd moved out of the house, I asked her about it again. She finally admitted that she used to see people all the time in that house. She described seeing figures walking past her office door in the basement. When I asked about the boy, she said she hadn't seen him specifically, but she had seen other figures, a man and a woman walking together, for example. She also shared a few unsettling stories, like a stereo blasting at full volume in the middle of the night, even though it had been unplugged. My aunt, who stayed in my brother's room one night, also had a terrifying experience. She woke up paralyzed, feeling an immense pressure on her chest. Then the mattress began shaking violently and slamming into the wall. She never stayed the night again. Another story came from my brother's best friend, Seth, who stayed in the basement once when they were in second grade. After that night, he refused to return for a sleepover. Years later, Seth told me he had seen a being of light in the basement bedroom but didn't want to share more details over text, saying he'd only explain in person. As skeptical as I've always been about ghosts, I can't explain what happened that day with the boy. It wasn't my imagination. I was calm, the house was brightly lit, and I wasn't scared beforehand. The older I get, the more I realize there are things we don't understand. My mom later told me a man had died in the house. He'd had a heart attack in the hall bathroom, which might explain why I always felt so uneasy there. But that doesn't explain the boy, the other figures, or the wide range of strange events. Given the house's location, at the bottom of a hill at the end of a road, and backing into woods, I wonder if the property acted as some sort of energy portal or focus point. Even now, I can't make sense of it all. But I think about that house and the red-haired boy, often. In 2010, I was living in a small town in northern Michigan. My friends and I all lived nearby on the same road, and we spent most of our time together, playing on the beach in the summer and sledding every hill we could find in winter. One day, while eating lunch at a pizza place, my friend Beth brought up something unusual. Her mom had found a Ouija board in their basement and said Beth could use it. We were thrilled by the idea, especially since the forest and beach near my house were rumored to be paranormal hotspots. That night, after my parents went to bed, we planned to meet at my place at midnight. Beth, Jonathan, Michael, Tyler, and I, names changed, agreed to bike through the dark, quiet roads to my small cabin nestled among 7 others in the forest. By the time they arrived, it was pitch black, with only the faint sounds of the woods around us. We set up the board under a crooked tree I called the Halloween tree. It was a twisted, knobby pine that curved at the top, forming an alcove half covered with water and sand. A flat rock served as a table for the board, while the rest of us waited our turns on a small dock nearby. Beth and Jonathan went first, whispering questions into the night. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then suddenly a large branch, about 3 feet long, fell from the tree. It hadn't seemed loose before, but we dismissed it as coincidence and moved on. When Tyler took Jonathan's place, the planchette began moving in slow circles. We were convinced he was doing it himself, but he swore he wasn't. Tyler asked the spirit its name, and the planchette spelled N-O. Confused, we asked how it had died. It spelled N-O again. Every question, its birth date, family, and whether it was good or evil, received the same answer. When we told it to leave, it moved the planchette to goodbye. By this point, I was on edge, glancing over my shoulder constantly. It was supposed to be my turn next, but I refused, so Michael took my place. When Michael asked if there were any spirits present, the board began spelling go repeatedly. When Beth asked who should go, the planchette pointed to Michael. Startled, he asked where it wanted him to go, and it spelled line, as though it knew we had an order. Michael asked if the spirit wanted anyone to replace him, and the planchette spelled my name, Aid, multiple times. By then, I was near tears but reluctantly agreed to take Michael's place. As soon as my fingers touched the planchette, it spelled smile. I wasn't sure if it wanted me to smile or if it was mocking me. Terrified, I said hello, and the board replied, H-I. I asked the spirit its name, and it slowly spelled your before stopping. At that point, I broke down crying. Michael hugged me and reassured me, encouraging me to keep going. I asked more questions and learned that the spirit was a boy who died in 1998, the year I was born, on December 12th, my exact birth date. When I tried to dismiss him, the planchette repeatedly spelled N-O for nearly 2 minutes. I firmly said, "You are dismissed. Goodbye." And this time, the board spelled okay before moving to goodbye. Shaken. Beth and I cried while Michael and Tyler tried to explain what had happened to my parents, who had been woken by the commotion. Jonathan angrily packed up the board, yelling at Beth that we should throw it into the water. We didn't, though I wished we had. Instead of scolding us, my parents took pity on us and drove everyone home. I spent the night in their room, too terrified to think about the boy who had died on the day I was born. It all began about 5 years ago when I was 14. After my parents divorced, my mom, older sister Tara, and I moved into my grandma's house. My grandma, feeling she couldn't maintain the house anymore, moved into a small apartment in town. While she settled into her new home, we stayed behind in her house. That's where everything started. Not long after we moved in, Tara thought it would be fun to play with a Ouija board with her friends. The first time, they played in a friend's basement. They sat in a circle, lit a candle, and started asking questions. Nothing happened until they were about to give up. The candle made a high-pitched screeching sound and blew itself out. Terrified, they ran upstairs. The second time, they played in a cemetery. Gathered around a gravestone with another candle. They swore they heard chains rattling in the graveyard. Again, they fled in fear. Shortly after these sessions, strange things began happening. One night, as I lay in bed reading, my cat started staring at my closet. Something fell inside, making a loud noise that startled her. At the same time, my VCR turned on and off by itself. It was odd, but I brushed it off. Another night, I was playing with a 20 questions toy, trying to make it guess vampire. Instead, it guessed devil, then began flickering and making strange noises. I threw it across the room, frightened. My sister had her own unsettling experience. One morning, when she was home alone, her boyfriend called her cell phone. The reception was poor, so she told him to call the house phone. He called back, saying the line was busy. Tara checked the house phones. One was sitting off the hook, connected for 4 minutes, though she hadn't touched it. One night, my sister and I were watching TV when we heard loud, rhythmic thumping, like heavy work boots stomping up and down the basement stairs. We muted the TV to listen. Neither of us dared to investigate, so we went to bed, shaken. The activity escalated. Banging sounds from the basement, footsteps in empty rooms, and our cats staring at nothing before bolting in fear. Doors that were open would close, and closed doors would be found wide open, including closets. One of the creepiest experiences was a nightmare I had. In the dream, my closet door was rattling violently. When I pulled the covers over my head, the rattling stopped. I peeked out to see the closet light on, and the door slowly opened all the way. As I turned away, a tall demon with claws appeared by my bed and began strangling me. I woke up gasping for air and saw my closet light was on. At 3 a.m., a friend texted me, saying they dreamed they saw me struggling in bed as if something was attacking me. The coincidence terrified me. More bizarre incidents followed. Once, a friend and I returned home to find the house completely trashed. Chairs overturned, the dining table moved, and items scattered. Oddly, a porcelain Jesus figurine that sat above the TV had been thrown across the room but remained unbroken. Another time, my boyfriend and I left the house for 8 minutes to rent a movie. When we returned, the house was again in disarray, with the same items disturbed. One night after a jog, I saw a silhouette behind the living room curtains. Thinking it was my mom waiting to scold me for jogging late, I entered the house, but she was fast asleep. I realized I'd seen someone, or something else. By this point, the activity was following me. At my boyfriend's house, I recorded loud bangs and saw a heavy metal wall hanging lift and fall. His bathroom door shut by itself, and a closet doorknob next to me began slowly turning before the door creaked open. There was no knob on the inside, meaning whatever turned it had to be outside, right beside me. Another night, home alone, the TV screen went black, and the lamp turned off. Frozen in fear, I turned the lamp back on, only to feel a breath on my neck that blew my hair into my face. It was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. The hallway picture of a black and white house kept falling off the wall. We eventually left it on the dining table, but one day it simply vanished, never to be found. Around the same time, while watching TV one night, my sister's cat hissed at something behind me. Turning, I saw the dining room light swinging, a chair pulled out as if inviting me to sit. I was paralyzed with fear until my boyfriend arrived. My mom rarely believed these events until one night she woke me and said, "If anything weird happens, just ignore it." I knew then something had finally happened to her. The final straw for her came when we heard faint humming from the basement, like a lullaby. Grabbing a weapon, we ventured downstairs, finding nothing. As we turned to leave, a heavy box fell, sending us running upstairs. The activity still happens, sometimes daily, sometimes months apart, but it's always there. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've never had any paranormal experiences before, at least none that I recognized as such, until about a year ago when I believe I had a true encounter. Before I begin, I should mention that I have an illness that can sometimes cause hallucinations. However, after living with this condition for years, I can confidently distinguish hallucinations from reality. They typically occur only when my medication is off or my pain levels are high, and I am 100% certain this was not one of those episodes. The story takes place in Three Rivers, Michigan, where I was visiting my boyfriend for the second time since our long-distance relationship began. Due to work and financial constraints, we only managed to see each other about once a year. I was a few days into my visit when I found myself chatting with his brother about ghosts. The topic came up because of a show I had recently watched, which claimed to be based on real experiences. I was intrigued. That's when my boyfriend's brother casually mentioned that their house was very old, like many in the area, and that a boy who once lived there had committed suicide in the 1970s. Shocked and uneasy, I laughed it off, assuming he was joking. But he insisted it was true and added that a friend of his had even heard the boy walking through the halls at night. He explained that the house was so old and creaky you could hear exactly where someone was just by their footsteps. Later that night, as I snuggled up with my boyfriend in bed, the topic of ghosts came up again. He repeated what his brother had said about the boy, adding that sometimes you could hear him playing in the hallway at night. Startled and increasingly frightened, I clung to my boyfriend and eventually drifted off to sleep. What happened next was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I didn't feel as though I had fallen asleep. It felt as if I were fully awake. I saw two figures standing over me. They were shadowy and dark, and while I couldn't make out details, I instinctively knew that one of them was the boy his family had talked about. The other figure was an older man. The man seemed to be showing the boy something, and they were speaking, though their voices were muffled. I was paralyzed, unable to move. The older man reached out and placed his hand on my face, and my body went completely rigid. I struggled to move, to wake up, but I was trapped. A deep sense of desperation filled me. I could sense what they were saying but couldn't fully understand it. Just as panic overwhelmed me, everything went dark, and I woke up gasping for air. Even after waking, I felt an ominous presence in the room, as though someone was standing at the door, watching me. Terrified, I crept downstairs, too shaken to go back to sleep. It was around 3 a.m. As I sat there, I began to hear footsteps running back and forth in the upstairs hallway. They were light and quick, as if belonging to a child. I froze, tense and unsure of what to do. I knew it wasn't my boyfriend, he was still asleep in bed. His brother was in the room next to us, and I could hear his soft snores. His parents were also asleep downstairs. The footsteps continued for 10 minutes, then stopped. Every half hour or so, they started up again, back and forth, before finally stopping completely a few hours later. I never heard them again during the rest of my visit. This didn't happen the first time I visited his house. Looking back, I wonder if the tension in our relationship at the time somehow created negative energy that enabled the spirits. While I was deeply frightened, my gut tells me the boy's spirit wasn't harmful. He didn't seem malicious, just present. As for the older figure, I'm not so sure. There was something unsettling about him, something I can't quite put into words. When I shared my experience with my boss after returning home, She advised me to trust my instincts. My instincts tell me that what I experienced that night wasn't a dream. It was something far beyond that. Let me start by sharing a little about myself. I won't reveal any names, including my own. I'm turning 19 this October and have had paranormal experiences for as long as I can remember. Growing up, my mom, sister, and I lived in 2 houses where strange things happened. The first house was during my childhood, from about age 5 to 13. In the second house, it was just my mom and me after my sister moved out when she was 17 or 18. We lived there for about 2 years. I've since moved into a third house, where I've had no experiences, but the memories of those 2 earlier homes stay with me. In the first house, I shared a room with my sister and we had bunk beds. I think I was on the top bunk. I remember objects moving on their own, things going missing and never returning, feeling touches, and sometimes hearing whispers calling my name. At the time, I thought it was just my imagination and didn't give it much thought. Oddly, ghost stories terrified me, but the things I experienced firsthand didn't scare me as much. When we moved into the second house, I was 13 or 14, and things started to feel different. By then, I was fascinated by the paranormal, watching ghost-related movies and TV shows. That fascination made me pay closer attention to what was happening. One of the first things I remember was sitting at the computer desk and feeling something breathe on my neck. Then, I felt fingers running through my hair. I turned around, expecting to see someone there, but the room was empty. After that, nothing else happened that day. A few years later, my best friend stayed over for the weekend. At one point, I was in the living room with my mom while my friend stayed in my room. My mom was browsing our movie shelf, deciding what to watch. I saw her pick out Bring It On, think about it, and put it back before choosing something else. After she finished that movie, she went back to grab Bring It On, but it was gone. She asked if my friend or I had taken it, but we hadn't. 5 years later, we still haven't found it. One day, home alone, I decided to conduct my own paranormal investigation. I didn't have any equipment like cameras or recorders, just a piece of paper and a pen to document anything unusual. I placed a cat toy, a small mouse, on the edge of the entertainment center, with its tail hanging over the edge. I asked, "If you are here, please move the tail of the mouse so I know you're real." After a couple of minutes, I saw the tail lift, hold for a moment, then drop, shifting the toy slightly. I thanked the spirit and told them I believed they were there. That was the most significant event from my investigation. Another recurring experience was waking up at 3:20 a.m. every night for no apparent reason. I'd lie in bed, trying to fall back asleep, but I'd feel something crawling on the bed. It wasn't my cats. They were both on the floor beside me. Sometimes the blankets would be pulled off me. These things only ever happened to me, and only around 3 a.m., which I later learned is often called the witching hour. My mom dismissed it, saying I must have been dreaming, but I know I wasn't. One day, while sitting on the living room couch, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a misty white-blue figure in the dining room. It appeared to be a man in his 20s or 30s, African-American, wearing old mining clothes and holding a pickaxe. The image was so vivid that I can still see it in my mind. When we moved into our current house, house number 3, 2 years ago, all the paranormal activity stopped. Nothing unusual has happened since. This leaves me wondering, why did everything stop when I moved? Could I have had a spirit attachment that decided not to follow me? Or was it tied to the previous houses somehow? I've often wondered why some people experience many paranormal events while others never encounter anything unusual. I'm one of those people who has had numerous strange experiences, and this is just one of them. When I was 14, my grandparents moved to Iowa for my grandfather's job, and my parents and I moved into their Michigan home to take care of it. The house was old but well-maintained and steeped in family history. My great-grandparents had emigrated from Prussia, a country that no longer exists, in the early 1940s and settled in that house. Both of them eventually passed away there. My great-grandmother's sister, Frida, was a black witch from the old country and married to a 33rd-degree Masonic priest. According to family stories, Frida and her husband performed strange rituals in the woods behind the house. Frida despised my grandmother, who was a deeply religious and kind person, and my great-grandfather would warn my father as a child to stick to the right book, referring to the Bible because he believed there were two black books in the world. While living there, strange things happened all the time. Objects would vanish and reappear in odd places you'd never think to check. When I was 16, I became so terrified of my bedroom that I started sleeping in my mom's bed. Often, I would wake up in the middle of the night feeling as though something was lying on top of me, paralyzing me. It wasn't a dream or sleep paralysis. It felt spiritual, like a smothering presence. The sensation would only stop after I managed to whisper the name Jesus, which took all my strength and effort. These episodes were absolutely terrifying. There were also nights when we'd hear loud crashes and banging from the second floor, as if furniture were being tipped over and bookshelves knocked down. But when we went upstairs to check, everything was exactly as it had been. Not a single thing out of place. When I was older, my boyfriend and I stayed in the house for a few months after our daughter was born, trying to save money and get ahead. One afternoon in July, I was home alone with my baby, giving her a bottle in the living room as she dozed off. I was sitting in the recliner near the hallway, watching TV, when I suddenly felt a burst of icy air blowing directly on us from the hallway. We didn't have air conditioning, and this cold was unnatural. It felt like an air conditioner set to full blast right beside me. Frozen with fear, I stopped rocking the chair and stared straight ahead, too scared to look toward the hallway. The icy chill lingered, and after a few minutes, I realized it wasn't going away. Summoning my courage, I slowly turned my head toward the hallway. That's when I saw it. Floating a foot off the ground, a figure in long black robes glided across the hallway and passed through my parents' closed bedroom door. I was paralyzed with fear but managed to force myself out of the chair and ran to the door. I opened it, only to find nothing inside except the curtains fluttering at the window. Terrified, I grabbed my daughter and ran outside. I stayed there for 3 hours until my boyfriend returned from work. Though I'd experienced many frightening things in that house before, this was the first time I had actually seen something, and it was beyond horrifying. My grandparents eventually moved back to Michigan and returned to the house. Since then, I've visited many times but have never experienced anything paranormal there again. It's as if their presence brought peace to the home. I've had many strange encounters throughout my life, but I can say with certainty that hearing or feeling something is one thing. Actually seeing a ghost is an entirely different level of terror. That moment remains the only time I've ever seen one, and it's an experience I'll never forget. In the first part of the story, I shared about seeing a black-robed figure floating through a closed bedroom door in my family house. However, that was just one of many experiences I've had there. I wanted to take the time to share a few more. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I lived in that house as well. For the sake of clarity, I'll work backward through the timeline of events. Everyone who visited that house while my grandparents were away remarked on how eerie it felt, as if they were constantly being watched. Some were skeptical, but most couldn't shake the unsettling energy. Having lived there for years, I usually felt okay, except when I was on the spiral staircase in my bedroom or near the loft. The spiral staircase was the worst. Every time I climbed it, I'd get halfway up, and the air seemed to change. It was colder, heavier, and felt charged with something threatening. My sister and brothers all experienced it too, so I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I'd often find myself running the rest of the way to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me out of pure fear. Even when I wasn't on the stairs, the loft above always made me feel like something was watching me from the shadows. If the hallway light wasn't on, the back living room near the stairs would become unbearably uncomfortable, especially if I was alone in the house. During my pregnancy, I was very sick and took frequent naps to escape the discomfort. One afternoon, I fell asleep in the back room near the stairs. Suddenly, I woke up with the unmistakable sensation of someone touching my abdomen, right where my daughter was in my belly. It felt exactly like the pressure I'd experienced at night, as if someone or something was pressing on me. This time, though, it was focused entirely on my stomach. I was terrified. I swear, I never took another nap in that room again. Later, my boyfriend and I moved up north to Michigan for his job. My daughter was born in April 2002 during a heavy snowstorm. Yes, in April. It was a cozy, quiet time to welcome a new baby into our lives. The hospital gave us a gift basket to celebrate her birth. It included fruit, chocolates, champagne glasses, and a bottle of sparkling grape juice. That evening, we settled in and admired our new baby. My boyfriend poured us each a glass of juice and made a toast to our daughter. Afterward, he set the bottle down on the counter behind him, and we began chatting and laughing. Then, out of nowhere, I saw the bottle of juice float a foot into the air, hovering right above his head. I froze mid-sentence, unable to process what I was seeing. My boyfriend noticed my expression, and as soon as he realized something was wrong, the bottle dropped straight to the floor. The bottle fell perfectly vertical, and when it hit the ground, it sprayed juice all over the room. We were stunned and couldn't believe what had just happened. I'm convinced that whatever touched my stomach while I was pregnant had followed us all the way to the hospital to celebrate my daughter's birth. While it didn't feel malicious at the time, part of me can't help but wonder if it was connected to the black-robed figure I saw in the family house. It was August 2nd, 2014. My younger cat, Penguin, who had been with me for 12 years, suffered a stroke. My husband took her to the vet, where we learned it was caused by high blood pressure. She was sent home with fluids and 3 medications. Since she wasn't eating, I had to syringe feed her. Following the vet's advice, we kept her in the spare bedroom in our basement. Our older cat, Joy, kept her distance and didn't seem happy about the new arrangement. By the 3rd day of her recovery, Penguin seemed to give up. She no longer resisted when I fed her or gave her medication. That morning, I went to see her, and the moment I walked in, I knew she didn't want to stay any longer. She lay on the floor, staring at me. I sat by her side, petting her and crying. I begged her to stay, but she simply curled up next to me, purred softly, and passed away. It was 11 a.m. on August 4th, 2014, when I said goodbye to my sweet Penguin. Penguin was a true scaredy cat, afraid of everything, even her own shadow, but she loved me fiercely. She was always by my side, especially at bedtime, where she'd sleep beside me. She was small, with soft gray fur speckled with bits of orange, a timid but loving soul. After her passing, I couldn't bring myself to go into that basement room. It was mostly empty except for a table she had hidden behind, and her food and water dishes, which stayed there for a week. I hated that room so much I kept the door shut, though we usually left doors open in our house. For months, I avoided the basement entirely. Occasionally, I thought I could still hear her faint cries from that room. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of her out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing there. For months later, for my birthday, my mom agreed to help me find a dog. We visited shelters, farms, and houses, but nothing felt right. After a month of searching, I was discouraged. During our final stop at a local shelter we'd already visited several times, my daughter asked if we could look at the cats. Feeling defeated, I agreed. Inside the cat sanctuary, a bright-eyed, multicolored kitten immediately greeted us. He rubbed his cheeks against mine and my daughter's and showed no hesitation in being close to us. Felt like fate, and we brought him home. We named him Gurus. At first, Gurus was curious but cautious, as any animal would be in a new home. After 2 weeks, he was comfortable enough to roam the house freely. We moved the food and litter back to the basement, but something unexpected happened. When I carried him downstairs for the first time, he became frantic, struggling to escape. Garrus, who was normally calm and quiet, was acting completely out of character. I showed him the food and litter, but he bolted up the stairs the moment I let go. When I went back up, he greeted me as if nothing had happened. Over time, I noticed he'd go downstairs briefly to eat or use the litter box but never stayed long or explored the basement. 2 months later, I woke up to Gurus crying in the middle of the night. I searched for him upstairs but couldn't find him. His cries stopped, and as I walked through the house, a soft, cold breeze brushed against my feet. A chill ran up my spine. When I looked down, I swear I saw Penguin leading me through the hallway, into the kitchen, and toward the basement. Hesitant but desperate for a chance to see her again, I followed. At the bottom of the basement stairs, I found Gurus sitting outside the spare bedroom door, the room where Penguin had passed. He stared at me intently. I reached for the door, and as I opened it, another soft, cold gust of wind passed over me. Gurus darted inside. Inside, the room was just as I'd left it, the table, the emptiness. It smelled faintly of Penguin. The window was sealed shut, leaving no explanation for the breeze. In the corner where Penguin had spent her final moments, Gurus sat, gazing at me as if he'd known me forever. I asked him softly, "Do you see her? Feel her?" He responded with a noise somewhere between a purr and a meow, the exact sound Penguin used to make when startled or sleepy. It was a noise Gurus had never made before. Since that night, Gurus has stayed close to me. He sleeps beside me, just as Penguin did, and greets me when I come home, something he hadn't done before. Recently, I discovered Gurus was born on the same day Penguin passed away. He avoids the basement just as Penguin had, but his affection for me feels eerily familiar. I miss my Penguin dearly, but Gurus has brought a comfort I didn't expect. I can't explain the similarities between them, but they're too strong to ignore. I wanted to share this story to hear your thoughts. Was this just coincidence, or is there something more? In the summer of 2009, I lived in Best Hall at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, Michigan. The dorm was old and lacked air conditioning, so we relied on fans to survive the summer heat. Temperatures often ranged between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, making the environment stuffy and unbearable for most of us. But when I moved into my room on the 4th floor, something felt off immediately. My room, situated at the end of the hall near a lounge area, was unnaturally cold. Despite the sweltering heat outside, the room felt like a freezer, with no logical explanation for the drastic temperature drop. The chill wasn't just physical. It carried an unsettling energy that made me feel like I wasn't alone. Though I initially tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was there. I found myself having quiet conversations with the presence, as strange as it sounds, because I felt certain it was listening. My roommate must have thought I was losing my mind until she began witnessing strange things too. One night, as we were settling in to sleep, the peace was shattered by a sudden commotion. It sounded like books being thrown onto the ground, but nothing in the room had moved. My roommate and I exchanged nervous glances, neither of us daring to investigate. Then, something even stranger happened. 2 bright lights appeared on the wall above my bed, resembling headlights. This made no sense. Our room was on the 4th floor, and there was no traffic outside. Even if there had been, the angle and brightness were impossible. It left us both terrified. The most unsettling experience, however, happened one morning. I had fallen asleep early because I needed to wake up at 6 a.m. for the day ahead. In my dream, I saw a man sitting on my bed. He seemed like an older gentleman, and while his presence wasn't threatening, it was undeniably eerie. Suddenly, he left the dream, and I was jolted awake by a loud, piercing beeping sound. My first thought was that it was the fire alarm, a scheduled drill we'd been warned about. But the sound wasn't coming from the ceiling, where the fire alarms were installed in every room. Instead, it was emanating from a corner of the room. When I looked over, I saw a dense, flashing orb of light, impossibly bright. Half asleep and panicked, I scrambled to grab my glasses, which had somehow ended up far under my bed. After wrestling them on, I looked back, but the orb was gone. Shaken, I turned to my roommate and asked, "Did you see that?" She said she hadn't, but I know what I saw. The light was so intense that I couldn't believe it hadn't woken her up. From that moment on, I never slept with the lights off in that dorm. Though I never felt in danger, the room carried a heavy, tense energy. The cold, which initially seemed like a relief from the summer heat, became a constant reminder of the strange presence in the room. I even started bringing heavy Afghans to keep warm, something I never thought I'd need in the middle of summer. When the summer ended, I moved out, worried that the spirit might attach itself to me and follow me home. Thankfully, it didn't. I haven't seen or sensed the man from my dreams since then, and I've often wondered why he was tied to that specific room. To this day, I still think about the flashing white orb and the noise it made. Was it trying to communicate? Was it a warning? Or something else entirely? I wish I knew the answers, but the experience remains a mystery. I've hesitated to share these experiences because some might dismiss them as dreams or hallucinations. While I understand why someone might think that, I can only interpret them as interactions with my deceased family members. Recently, after seeing a similar story here, I decided it was time to share my own. In the winter of 1976, I was a 27-year-old divorcee and single mother to my 4-year-old son, Mikey, not his real name. We lived in family housing at the University of Michigan while I pursued graduate studies. That year, I decided to undergo elective surgery, a procedure expected to be straightforward with just a few days of recovery in the hospital. My aunt kindly offered to stay at our apartment to care for Mikey until I was back on my feet. Unfortunately, the surgery was anything but routine. Everything that could go wrong did: multiple blood clots near the surgery site and in my lungs, severe allergic reactions to medication, and complications with the wound requiring additional surgeries. My parents lived in another state, but my mother flew to Michigan immediately and stayed in my hospital room for 2 months. Her presence was critical. She had to call for help several times when my condition turned dire. I'm convinced her vigilance saved my life. I wasn't always conscious during the worst days and only later pieced together the events with my mother's help. The day the blood clots were discovered, the doctors started me on heparin, a blood thinner meant to dissolve the clots and prevent further complications. It was a precarious situation. Several hours later, my mother felt it was safe enough to leave me briefly to get coffee. I had been drifting in and out of sleep. At some point, I woke up and realized I wasn't alone. Standing just inside the hospital room door was a group of elderly people, bundled up in heavy winter coats. They were huddled together, whispering and glancing in my direction with worried expressions. Their presence felt strangely comforting, though I wasn't entirely sure why. As I focused on their faces, recognition hit me like a wave. These were my great-aunts from my mother's side of the family, standing with their husbands. Warm memories began to flood my mind: 4th of July picnics, Christmas gatherings, and summers spent at their lakeside cottages. It felt so natural to see them there, as though they'd come to check on me in my time of need. I wanted to stay awake and soak in their comforting presence, but I couldn't fight the pull of exhaustion. Slowly, I drifted back into unconsciousness. When I opened my eyes again, my mother was back with a styrofoam cup of coffee and a magazine in hand. Still groggy, I asked her, "Where did all the people go?" She looked at me, puzzled. "What people?" "The family," I replied. "They were just here." Her expression turned concerned. "No one was here," she said. "I only went down the hall to the coffee machine. I would have seen anyone coming to visit you." As I began describing the people I'd seen, it hit me. They were all family members who had passed away years earlier. The realization was profound and left me deeply comforted, as though they had come to watch over me during one of the scariest moments of my life. The first part of my story left off in the winter of 1976, when I was a 27-year-old divorced mother and graduate student. A supposedly routine surgery had turned life-threatening due to complications. One of the worst moments came when the hematoma near my surgery site burst without warning. My mother was helping me slowly get out of bed when a sudden gush of blood poured down, soaking everything, including my new slippers. Just before I lost consciousness, I managed to complain about the slippers being ruined, my last thought before blacking out. Later, my mother told me how she had sprinted down the hall for help. By the time she returned with a nurse, my blood pressure was reading 0, and it took many units of blood to stabilize me. I have no memory of these events. What I do remember, however, is having visitors again. It started as if the room were blanketed in mist. Out of the haze, I noticed 3 young adults sitting in a row beside my bed, silently watching me. They were dressed in clothing that reminded me of old-time Quaker attire. The first was a pale, sandy-haired young man. Next to him was a girl who bore such a striking resemblance to him that I thought they must be siblings, possibly even twins. On the far right was a young, medium-complected black woman. Without speaking, they began to talk to me. Though their communication was silent, their words were clear in my mind. They radiated kindness and empathy, but their message was far from comforting. They had been sent to guide me home. I wasn't ready to go. Panic set in as I tried to explain to them that I couldn't leave my little boy, that I needed to stay and take care of him. Despite my protests, they continued to gently persuade me, their calm demeanor in sharp contrast to my growing desperation. Then, abruptly, they stopped. All three turned their attention across the room, looking nervous and uneasy. I followed their gaze and saw a familiar figure standing there. My grandmother. My grandmother was a woman of formidable presence in life, and that hadn't changed. Her piercing glare was enough to intimidate anyone, whether it was tardy school children, pushy salespeople, or, on rare occasions, members of our own family. She didn't look at me once. Her focus was solely on the three young people, and her expression was one of pure wrath. As she advanced toward them, they exchanged frightened glances, stood up, and began backing away. Moments later, they were gone. My grandmother followed, disappearing without a word or a glance in my direction. For decades, I've reflected on this experience. Over time, I've come to believe that compassionate spirits guide us at the moment of death, helping us transition into the next world. But I've always wondered about those three young people. Who were they? Why were they sent to me instead of someone I knew? A few years ago, during the height of the genealogy craze, I began researching my mother's side of the family. What I discovered was astonishing. Some of my ancestors were Mennonites who had emigrated from Europe to escape religious persecution. Many settled in communities where Mennonites still live today, wearing clothing that resembles Quaker dress, a connection that makes sense, as the Quakers originated as a group that split off from the Mennonite Church. I also learned that some anti-slavery Mennonite groups in the U.S. included African American members. Could the visitors have been distant relatives from that era? Perhaps they were chosen because they were closer to me in age than my more recently departed family members, making it easier for them to communicate with me. It's just a theory, but it brings me a great deal of comfort. My grandmother's intervention that day gave me the time I needed to continue living and raising my son. And knowing that the visitors may have been part of my family's history helps me feel connected to them, even after all these years. When I was 11 years old, my father announced that we were moving. He'd received a promotion, which required us to relocate. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but it wasn't my decision. Before we moved into our new home, my aunt and uncle in Traverse City, Michigan, offered to let us stay with them since they had extra rooms. At that time, I'd never encountered anything remotely paranormal. No ghosts, no odd sights or sounds, nothing. But things changed as time went on. After a year in my aunt and uncle's house, we finally moved into our new home when I was 12. The house was large, with a basement, a main floor, a second floor, and an attic we rarely used. From the start, the house gave me an odd feeling, as if something was slightly off. Still, we began unpacking, settling into our new space. Then night fell. My father had set up my bunk bed, and, as usual, I claimed the top bunk. I've always felt safer being higher up, where I could see the whole room. That first night, with the lights off and the house completely silent, I lay in bed, trying to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Opening my eyes, I glanced around the room, squinting in the darkness. Seeing nothing, I told myself it was just my imagination, probably my brain adjusting to the unfamiliar room. I rolled over to face the wall and tried to fall asleep. Just as I was drifting off, I felt it. Something or someone sat on my mattress. The weight was unmistakable, pressing down on the bed. My heart raced, but I stayed still, unsure if it was real or my mind playing tricks on me. Fast forward to now. I'm 17 years old, and my family has moved again, this time from Traverse City to Roscommon, Michigan. This house is different. The activity I've experienced here is far more frequent and unnerving than in the previous home. I can't tell if something is following me or if this is a new spirit that's decided to target me. On weekends, my parents often leave me home alone while they run errands or go grocery shopping. I usually sit in the living room, reading quietly with my pets at my feet or on the couch beside me. That's when the noises start. At first, it's just little sounds, scratches or faint taps, coming from the loft in the living room. With my pets nearby and accounted for, I try to dismiss it as a small animal in the walls. But the noises evolve from scratching to distinct tapping, deliberate and rhythmic. I have to resist the urge to call out questions like, "Who's there?" or "Hello?" because I know no one else is home. I sit silently, listening, as the tapping eventually fades away. Once, I was walking to my room when I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, as if someone was running after me. Panicking, I spun around, but no one was there. The eerie part? I could feel a presence directly behind me, followed by a soft, cold breeze brushing across my face. Why me? I often wonder. No one else in my family seems to experience this. It's as if I'm the only one this spirit has chosen to target. The entity's interactions have grown more direct over time. I'll feel a tap on my shoulder, as if someone is trying to get my attention. Every time I turn around, only to find nothing there. If I ignore the taps, it escalates. That's when I hear it whisper my name, soft, almost strained, as though it struggles to form the word. I want to investigate further and understand what's happening, but I lack the proper skills, experience, and equipment. What should I do? Ever since my first ghost encounter, I've been fascinated by ghost investigations. While I'm only 17 and don't have my own professional team, my friend Ally and I often go on little adventures in her apartment building to explore the paranormal. This encounter happened recently, during Ally's 17th birthday party and sleepover. I was the first to arrive, and while we waited for the others, we watched our favorite show, Ghost Adventures, on the Travel Channel. As we watched, Ally suddenly turned to me and said, "Hey, we should do our own little investigation." I agreed, thinking it would be fun and probably uneventful. Ally's apartment is known to be haunted, though. She and her mom have both experienced activity, and Ally has even seen their resident ghost, whom they call Chris. Chris seems to stay in Ally's room, occasionally rattling the blinds while she's trying to sleep. Ally once saw him as a white mist near the ceiling and even as a transparent figure standing in the bathroom doorway. After the rest of our friends arrived, we enjoyed the party and waited until it was dark to begin our investigation. Ally and I gathered our gear: a camcorder, phone cameras, a thermal camera, and an EVP recorder. Ally's mom, also interested in ghost hunting, let us borrow some of her equipment. Before leaving the apartment, we took pictures to document the room setup in case anything moved while we were away. We split into 2 teams of 2, Ally and Amanda took the hallways, while my friend Riley and I explored the stairwells. We planned to text each other if anything major happened. Riley and I quietly climbed the stairs, cameras ready, but at first, nothing happened. We stopped and began asking questions. "Is there anyone here with us?" And, "If you are here, what is your name?" After a few minutes, my EMF reader started to beep. Excited, I showed it to Riley. That's when she pointed behind me. I turned and froze. On the staircase above us was a dark, shadowy cloud, resting silently. It was unmistakable, and we knew there was no one else in the stairwell. Ally and Amanda were still in the hallways. I texted Ally to come to the stairwell, and when she arrived, I explained what had happened. Unfortunately, the shadow cloud had disappeared. We decided to check the EVP recording, and to our surprise, we captured a response. A raspy but young-sounding voice told us his name was Jeremy. He seemed to hang out in the stairwell, and we were intrigued. We decided to continue up the stairs, hoping to communicate with Jeremy again. I led the way with the EMF reader, which started beeping as we ascended. We stopped to turn on the EVP recorder and began asking more questions. Suddenly, a chill swept over all of us. It was a hot summer night with temperatures in the 90s, and there were no open windows or drafts in the stairwell. As we checked our surroundings, we saw the shadow cloud again, this time descending toward us. A sense of unease washed over me. Something about this shadow didn't feel right, and I instinctively told everyone, "We need to leave. Now." We began making our way back to Ally's floor. I led the group, but as we reached the last step, I felt Riley grab my arm, nearly pulling me down. I steadied myself and turned to her. She looked pale and scared, saying her legs had suddenly given out, as if something had drained her energy. Ally, who had been filming, captured what happened next. The shadow cloud was hovering around really, cold air radiating from it. The EMF reader went wild, and I had to turn it off. I quickly turned on the EVP recorder and asked, "Are you Jeremy?" No response. "Why did you attack my friend?" Silence. "Can she please have her energy back so we can leave?" We waited. After 5 tense minutes, the shadow cloud slowly faded, and the cold dissipated. Really regained her strength, and we carefully made our way back to Ally's apartment, keeping a close eye on her in case she collapsed again. Once we were safely back, we reviewed the EVP recording. The only response was to my question, "Why did you attack my friend?" A deep, angry voice growled, "I want you to leave." We still don't know if the shadow was Jeremy or another spirit entirely. Why did it target really? Was it simply warning us? Or was it something more sinister? Any thoughts on what we encountered? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In the summer of 2014, my mother and father-in-law went on their long-awaited European trip, leaving their farm, a beautiful lake property in southwestern Michigan, unattended. While they were gone, my wife and sister-in-law alternated taking care of the animals, collecting mail, and managing other tasks around the property. One weekday, I had the day off from work, so I volunteered to help out with the chores along with my friend Dustin. We knocked out the tasks quickly, then grilled some food and relaxed by the lake for a couple of hours. Before the sun set, we returned to the house to double-check the chore list in the kitchen and make sure we hadn't missed anything. That's when things started to feel off. A heavy, unsettling feeling seemed to settle over the house. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like a weight had dropped on my chest. I sat in the sunroom, trying to shake off the unease. Dustin came in and sat across from me, looking nervous. "What is it?" he asked. I told him I didn't feel right. For a while, we just sat there, talking nervously. At one point, Dustin became almost tearful and started sharing stories from his childhood. Experiences with a paranormal entity that had haunted his bedroom. The air in the house felt charged, like something was about to happen, but we couldn't put our finger on what. Then it happened. Outside the door, near the top of the porch, I saw the strangest light I've ever seen. It was brilliant blue, almost like dozens of laser beams moving in multiple directions. The night outside was pitch black, so I couldn't see the source of the light. My mind searched for a rational explanation. I wanted it to be something ordinary, something I could easily dismiss. Determined to investigate, I stood up and headed for the door. "Sit down," Dustin shouted abruptly, his voice laced with urgency. Startled, I sat back down. For the next few minutes, we stayed in the sunroom, talking and even joking to lighten the mood. Slowly, the oppressive feeling lifted, and we eventually decided to leave and head home. It wasn't until later that I truly grasped the strangeness of what we'd seen. Dustin and I still talk about that night from time to time, and it's his account of the light that adds a fascinating perspective. Since he was facing me with his back to the laser-like display, he didn't see what I did. Instead, he saw something entirely different. According to Dustin, what he witnessed was a large, perfectly shaped blue box. The edges were sharp, with no light spilling over them, and inside the box were more lines or smaller boxes, all moving within the larger form. He described it as the most brilliant blue he'd ever seen, illuminating everything it touched. The box moved from right to left, scanning the wall and me. Dustin told me he had expected something otherworldly, maybe ghostly or even alien, to follow the light into the room. That's why he'd yelled at me to sit down. To this day, neither of us can explain what we saw. The memory of that brilliant blue light and the overwhelming sense of unease still lingers, leaving us with more questions than answers. My name is Joy, and here's a little irony to start. I used to struggle with depression. Yes, Joy was depressed. It's okay to chuckle a bit at the contrast. My battle with depression began when I was just 12 years old. Looking back, I sometimes wonder, How could a 12-year-old girl even understand what depression is? But despite my loving family, stable home, and relatively fortunate life, I was consumed by a deep and unexplainable darkness. The truth? It wasn't my circumstances that caused my misery. It was something far more unsettling. Demons. At first glance, I might have seemed like a typical misunderstood teenager. I wore black, baggy clothes, dark makeup, and chains. My nervous stare was often mistaken for a menacing glare. But inside, I was just a shy girl who found beauty in the darker side of things. Growing up in a church, my style and demeanor made others wary of me. People spread rumors that I was involved in the occult or even possessed by demons. Ironically, it wasn't until after these accusations started that I began experiencing paranormal activity. As the bullying and rumors spread, I became withdrawn. My grades dropped, I avoided my family, and I spent hours locked in my room, fantasizing about ending my pain. I was emotionally numb, a shell of a person, until one day, I started hearing voices. It began subtly. While I was at school, a church school where I spent nearly every day of my childhood, I'd hear my name whispered. The voices were clear, even when surrounded by noise. They always came from dark places, like a shadowy hallway or an empty classroom. The whispers were hypnotic, pulling me closer. Slowly, these voices became more frequent and intrusive, as if they wanted to isolate me completely. I constantly asked myself, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel this way? Why can't I stop hearing these voices? My journal from that time is full of entries expressing my confusion and despair. As the voices grew stronger, so did my nightmares. These weren't ordinary bad dreams. They were vivid, terrifying, and felt all too real. I dreamt of 3 cloaked figures with void-like faces and clawed hands. In the dreams, 2 of them clung to my back, while the third attacked my family and classmates. I'd wake up to find scratches on my body, some still oozing blood. At my lowest point, everything changed. When I was 13, my mom called me to tell me that someone had anonymously donated money for me to join a youth group mission trip to Jamaica. I didn't want to go. I was tired of church and wanted nothing to do with the people there. But after my mom's persistence, I reluctantly agreed. The trip was eye-opening in many ways, but the real turning point came when I was alone in our sleeping quarters. I noticed a Bible on one of the cots and felt an unexplainable pull to open it. I had given up on God by then, but something made me flip through its pages. I landed in the book of Matthew, and the words that stood out to me were, "Joy, peace be with you." Felt like those words were written just for me. In that moment, I experienced something I can only describe as an overwhelming spiritual cleansing. My heart felt light, as if years of pain were being lifted. For the first time in over a year, I cried deep, uncontrollable sobs that left me feeling free. From that moment on, my depression was gone. The voices stopped. The nightmares ended. I was finally at peace. Today, I'm 20 years old, happy, healthy, and full of life. While I still encounter paranormal activity occasionally, it doesn't frighten me the way it used to. I've learned how to protect myself and have even helped others who've faced similar struggles. I don't follow an organized religion, but I trust God to guide me. My story isn't meant to preach. It's just my experience and how I overcame my darkest moments with unexpected help. For privacy reasons, certain names in this story have been changed, but the events are entirely true. In the summer of 2011, my boyfriend Nathan, before we were engaged or married, and I traveled to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, for his sister Barbie's wedding to her fiancé Frank. Frank, as we learned, is a shaman. He spends his days teaching others to hone and use their psychic abilities. Barbie, a former student of his, was also training to become a shaman. Naturally, Nathan and I were intrigued to meet Frank and spend time at their cabin in the Smoky Mountains. When we arrived, we were warmly greeted by Barbie and her friends from Michigan, who had arrived the day before. We climbed the wooden steps to their wraparound porch, where Frank sat in a rocking chair, smoking a long cigarette. He appeared older than we'd expected, probably in his late 60s or early 70s, which stood out even more next to Barbie, who had just turned 21. Although we'd seen their photos on Facebook, the age gap was striking in person. Still, love comes in all forms, and we quickly moved past our initial surprise. The evening was pleasant as we caught up with Barbie and got to know her kind and gentle fiancé. After everyone said their goodbyes, Nathan and I retired to the guest bedroom, which was separated by a single wall from Barbie and Frank's room. We settled onto a twin-size air mattress, ready to fall asleep. At first, the only sounds were the creak of crickets outside and the slow rhythm of our breathing. But about 10 minutes later, faint crying reached my ears. At first, I thought Barbie and Frank were watching TV, but then I remembered they didn't have one in their room. Barbie had shown me the house earlier. The crying grew louder, joined by strange noises. Screams, voices yelling and talking as if in argument, and guttural growls. The sounds were muffled, as if they were coming through water, but they persisted through the night, making sleep nearly impossible. The next morning, Nathan admitted he had heard the eerie sounds too. We tried to reason through what it could have been, but nothing made sense. Every night of our 4-night stay, we heard the same unnerving sounds. At one point, Barbie and Frank casually mentioned being in tune with the spiritual realm and having many spirits in their home, but we didn't feel comfortable bringing up what we had experienced. When it was time to leave, we packed our bags and began the 18-hour drive back to Michigan. At first, everything seemed normal, but a few nights after returning, things took a strange turn. The events at my parents' house. My parents' house has an attached garage, and the kitchen door leads directly into it. My basement bedroom is in the kitchen area, right across from the garage door. Upstairs, the dining room connects to the living room and hallway, where the bathroom and bedrooms are located. One night, around 2 a.m., I was chatting on the phone with Nathan when I heard the handle on the garage door jiggle, as if someone was trying to get in. I knew my older brother wasn't home, his car wasn't in the driveway, and my parents were fast asleep upstairs. I froze when I heard heavy footsteps above me, moving across the kitchen floor. Grabbing one of my collectible swords for protection, I crept up the stairs, phone pressed between my shoulder and ear. To my horror, the garage door was open. I raced to my parents' room, startling them awake with shouts of, "Someone's in the house!" My dad grabbed his handgun and searched the house but found no signs of a break-in. Strangely, the garage door was closed and locked again, even though I had left it open. Things didn't end there. Over the next 3 weeks, I woke up every night around 1:30 to 2 a.m. to the sound of gut-wrenching sobs. It was loud, sorrowful, and sounded like it was coming from the vents in my ceiling. Thinking it was my mom, I ran to her room, only to find both my parents fast asleep. The crying continued night after night, always at the same time, and reminded me of the wails I had heard at Barbie and Frank's cabin. The final incident occurred a few days before my wedding. My mom waited in the car while I grabbed a scarf from my bedroom closet. As I adjusted the scarf, a male voice whispered directly in my ear, "Hey!" Whipping around, I found no one there. Panicked, I called out for my dad or brother, knowing they weren't home. Then I heard heavy breathing, almost like a growl, all around me. I bolted upstairs and into the car, fighting off a panic attack. Even now, I can't explain the strange events that happened after my trip to Tennessee. Before that summer, the house had been quiet, with no paranormal activity. I don't know what followed me back, but I'm sure it all started at that cabin in Gatlinburg. I've had experiences with the paranormal since I was young, but the events I'll share now are the most intense I've encountered so far in my life. About 2 years ago, my family and I decided to move from our small 3-bedroom home on an acre of land to a larger, secluded 2-story house sitting on 17 acres. The house wasn't listed, we learned about it through word of mouth. A friend of a friend mentioned it and we arranged a walkthrough. It was perfect, peaceful, surrounded by nature and wildlife, and only 10 years old. The layout was well designed, and we immediately fell in love. We agreed on the price and moved in shortly afterward. Everything was great for the first year and a half, but about 6 months ago, things started to change. It began with odd episodes while I was sleeping. I'd wake up feeling like I couldn't breathe, At first, I dismissed it as sleep apnea or acid reflux, but it happened often, sometimes once or twice a week. I started losing sleep and found myself needing naps after work, which threw off my schedule even more. Then one evening, while napping on the couch, I woke up to what felt like hands pushing against my back. Half asleep, I assumed it was one of my kids playing and told them to go back to bed. The next night, it happened again, this time in bed with my wife. I felt laughter, loud and unsettling, right in my ear. Sounded like a young boy. My wife felt the bed move but didn't hear the laughter, which I knew would have scared her. I got up to check on the kids, but they were sound asleep in their rooms, which were far from ours. I told myself it was just a nightmare and went back to bed. Soon, my oldest son, almost 7, began waking up screaming in the middle of the night. I'd find him pressed against the back wall of his room, near the closet, shaking and crying. He never explained what was wrong but calmed down quickly and went back to sleep. This happened almost nightly and sometimes multiple times. Soon, my 2 youngest, ages 4 and 5, started having nightmares too. I still refused to believe the house could be haunted. Things escalated. My oldest began accusing me of hitting him on the head with a pillow or hiding beside his bed and yelling, "Boo!" I knew I hadn't done these things, and his accusations deeply unnerved me. Around the same time, I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye at night. My wife began experiencing strange occurrences too. One day, while making the bed, the radio turned on full blast, except it was already switched off. She dismissed it as a malfunction, but it shook her. Later, lights began flickering when she was in the shower or doing her hair. At night, we felt something sitting at the foot of our bed. The turning point came when the trash can door in the kitchen swung open and shut on its own as we were talking. I tried to rationalize it, saying it must have been an air pocket, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local ghost investigation team online. They agreed to help but were booked for a couple of weeks. They planned to investigate our home, bring a medium to communicate with the spirits, and cleanse the house. I hoped they'd help us find peace, but I didn't tell my wife until the week before their visit. She took the news better than I expected and agreed it was a good idea. But that same evening, something terrifying happened. After putting the kids to bed, we were watching TV in the living room. I went upstairs to get ready for bed, leaving her reclined with her tablet. 15 minutes later, I went back down to check on her, only to find her frozen in the chair, wide-eyed. She barely managed to whisper, "Don't go." Then she gasped loudly, leapt into my arms, and began trembling uncontrollably. She explained that after I left, she felt hands grab her ankles, followed by a heavy weight pressing down on her chest and stomach. Her hands were pinned, and she couldn't move or breathe. The pressure lifted just as I came downstairs. From that night on, she wouldn't let me out of her sight in the house. 3 days before the team was due, the activity peaked. It was like a horror movie. Banging on the ductwork, doors slamming, footsteps running, lights flickering, and even objects being thrown. At one point, a cereal box, bowl, and papers flew off the counter as if swiped by an invisible arm. My wife and I were terrified. I suggested we leave for my parents' house, but she asked if there was another way to handle it. I remembered reading about an invocation for Archangel Michael, said to help banish spirits. With nothing to lose, I pulled up the prayer on my phone and recited it loudly. When I finished, the house fell silent. My wife and I felt an immense weight lift, replaced by a sense of peace. That night, for the first time in weeks, we slept through the night. I emailed the ghost team to cancel their visit, explaining what had happened. Their medium replied, congratulating us and offering advice. Continue the prayer morning and night, light white candles, and place religious items around the home. It's now been 3 weeks without any activity inside the house. We feel safe again, though I've noticed some strange occurrences in the woods outside. But that's a story for another time. Whatever it was, poltergeist, succubus, or something else, I'm now a believer in the power of Archangel Michael and that invocation. Growing up, my 2 brothers and I attended a Catholic grade school that required about a 15 to 20-minute drive each way. One night, When I was in 3rd grade, I woke up with a terrible stomach flu. By morning, I was completely exhausted and stayed home from school, setting myself up on the couch in our family room. I had a small cup of water on the coffee table beside me and a bucket nearby, just in case I couldn't make it to the bathroom in time. Before my mom left to take my brothers to school, she came over to check on me. She kissed me on the forehead, noting that I had a high fever, and told me she had an errand to run after dropping them off but would be back soon. I heard the garage door open and close as they drove off. The house was quiet now, and I turned down the TV, eager to fall asleep. I don't know how long I had been sleeping when I woke up, feeling parched and dehydrated. Reaching for the cup of water on the coffee table, I suddenly noticed a pair of legs, woman's legs, walking toward me, passing between the couch and the table. Assuming it was my mom, I asked her to hand me my cup of water. Without hesitation, this person helped me sit up, handed me the cup, and stayed as I drank. They even took the cup back, placed it on the coffee table, tucked the blanket around me, and kissed my forehead, just as my mom had earlier. Still drowsy and assuming it was her, I drifted back to sleep. What followed felt so vivid yet peaceful. In my dream, my grandmother, my mom's mom, was sitting in the chair in our family room, talking to me about the things happening in my life at the time. She had passed away 6 years earlier, but in the dream, I felt no fear. I was calm, comforted, and even happy. Felt like she was simply there to check in on me. But the dream was interrupted when I woke to the sound of the garage door opening. My mom walked in, apologizing for taking so long. She explained that a train had stopped her at the tracks near our house. Confused, I asked, "But you were home earlier. When did you leave again?" She looked at me, puzzled, and said, "I haven't been home at all. I've been gone since I left to take your brothers to school." That's when I froze. If she hadn't been home, then who had handed me the cup of water, tucked me in, and kissed my forehead? Later that day, as I started to feel better, I told my mom about what had happened and described the dream of my grandmother. My family didn't talk about spirits or ghosts, so I was surprised when my mom said, "Maybe my mom came to take care of you while I was gone. Then she stayed to visit with you in your dream, where she knew you wouldn't be scared." We never discussed it again, but to this day, the memory is as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I truly believe my grandmother's spirit came to comfort me that morning while my mom was away. If that's true, all I can say is, thank you, Grandma. When my family, my husband, 2 daughters, and 1 son, moved to Minnesota, it was for a career opportunity for my husband. He was eager for the change and wanted us to join him. We purchased a 5-bedroom house for the occasion. My husband moved in ahead of us while we stayed back in Illinois to pack and arrange the move. The house had 3 entrances: the front, the side, and the back, which led to a deck. At the time, the house was completely empty except for 1 bedroom set left behind by the previous owners in a downstairs room. My husband decided to sleep in that furnished bedroom until we arrived with the rest of our belongings later in the week. One night, he heard the side door open. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs, growing louder as they approached the bedroom. The steps stopped directly in front of the door. Expecting someone to turn the knob, my husband jumped out of bed and flung the door open. But there was nothing, only pitch-black darkness. Shaken, he grabbed his bedding and ran upstairs to sleep in the living room. For the rest of the week, he avoided the downstairs entirely. He didn't tell us about this experience until months later. Once we moved in, my son bore the brunt of the strange happenings. His bedroom was downstairs, and he often saw a figure walking from the other downstairs bedroom toward the stairs. His doorknob would turn on its own, but no one ever entered. Calling out, "Hello, who's there?" was always met with silence. Sometimes, when he tried to sleep on the couch in the family room, he would feel someone push his head down into the cushions. He said he always felt a presence, and if it became too much, he'd come upstairs to my room and sleep across my bed. My children often said they felt safe in my bedroom. For my husband and me, the activity took on other forms. One morning, we were late for work because we couldn't find our car keys. Normally, everyone in the household hung their keys on the key rack. It was a habit. That morning, the keys were gone. We searched every corner of the house, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, when we gave up, my husband opened the refrigerator for a drink. There, sitting on the top shelf next to the milk and juice, were the keys. We were stunned. I couldn't very well explain to my coworkers that a ghost had hidden our keys, but that's exactly how it felt. Another time, while cooking or washing dishes in the kitchen, I'd feel as though someone had come up from the lower level and was standing directly behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck would rise. Whenever it happened, I'd firmly say, "Leave me alone or go away," and the feeling would eventually dissipate. My daughters also had their experiences. My next to oldest daughter was afraid of her closet and insisted on keeping it closed at night. Once, when we had guests staying over, they were lying in her room watching TV. Suddenly, the ceiling fan turned on by itself. I hadn't told them about the spirits in our house, but they came out of the room looking shaken and recounted what had happened. That's when I decided to share some of our ghostly encounters with them. Even I wasn't immune to the strange activity. One night, I decided to be brave and sleep on the side of the bed closest to the door, a spot I usually avoided, preferring my husband to sleep there instead. I fell into a deep sleep, which was unusual for me, and was suddenly awakened by a tap on my leg. Turning toward the door, I saw no one standing over me. Panicked, I jumped over my husband and moved to the side of the bed near the wall, pulling the covers up over my head before falling back asleep. Over the 13 years we lived in that house, these experiences became part of our lives. I even wrote to a psychic once, who told me there were two spirits in the house fighting for ownership. That revelation unsettled me deeply, but I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, we sold the house during my divorce, and I still wonder if the current owners experienced the same ghostly encounters. That home had a way of leaving its mark, and though we've moved on, the memories of those unexplainable moments linger. Minnesota nights can be breathtakingly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Normally, they're so dark you can't see 10 feet ahead, but when the moon manages to escape the winter clouds, its glow transforms the landscape. Snow-covered ground reflects its light, carving silvery pathways deep into the forest. I grew up along a beautiful lake in the countryside, a serene place, perfect for making childhood memories. But the house we lived in wasn't without its eccentricities. One late winter night proved our family wasn't the only one living there. It began like any other evening. After a couple of hours of television, our family retired to our separate bedrooms. My brother to his room at the end of the hallway, my parents and baby sister to the master bedroom, and me to the first room off the dining room. Exhausted from a long school day, I left my bedroom door open just a crack so my small dog could sneak in undetected and snuggle with me. I turned down the bedspread, crawled in, and quickly drifted off to sleep. Oddly, I woke up in the middle of the night, fully alert. Not groggy or disoriented as if coming out of a dream, but wide awake. My eyes darted to the clock on the dresser, its red digital numbers glowing 3:20 a.m. Moonlight filtered softly through the window, illuminating the room. That's when I heard it. A noise coming from the basement directly beneath my bedroom. The sound was familiar but out of place. The basement had a full apartment that once housed the previous owner's son. It was separated from the laundry area by a heavy wooden pocket door, which was always kept open during our time in the house. The door, installed on a sturdy metal track, made a distinctive rolling noise when opened or closed. This was the sound I heard. At first, I wasn't alarmed. My mom occasionally woke early to do laundry, so I assumed it was her. Closing my eyes, I tried to drift back to sleep. But then I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. My heart raced. This wasn't my mom. I listened intently as the footsteps climbed steadily toward the kitchen. Each step was slow, methodical, and deliberate, echoing in the stillness of the night. When the steps reached the top of the stairs, they didn't stop. Instead, they continued across the kitchen linoleum in the same eerie rhythm. The sound was vivid, almost tangible, but oddly, it didn't grow louder as I expected. The footsteps weren't coming toward my room, or so I thought. Suddenly, the sound stopped altogether. Realization hit me like a thunderbolt. The intruder must be on the carpet. Terror gripped me. I yanked the covers over my head, stiff as a board, barely daring to breathe. I lay there, waiting for the inevitable. My door swinging open, the footsteps continuing toward me, or a voice breaking the silence. But nothing happened. No door creaked open. No more footsteps echoed. No voices called out. The house was dead silent. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I slipped back into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, at the breakfast table, I casually asked my mom if she'd been up wandering around the house the previous night. To my shock, she screamed and burst into tears. "What time?" she demanded. 3:20 a.m., I replied, startled. Through her sobs, she confessed that she'd been hearing the exact same sounds. The pocket door sliding, the footsteps climbing the stairs. For the past 4 nights, always at the same time. To this day, we have no explanation for what or who it was. After that conversation, the sounds stopped entirely. I also never understood why our dog, usually quick to bark at any noise, remained silent throughout the ordeal. Years later, after we had moved out of the house, we learned a chilling detail about its past. The son of the previous owners, the one who had lived in the basement apartment, had taken his own life there. He had hung himself in the basement. This revelation remains our only clue. The story begins in 1975 when my family, my mother, brother, sister, and her newborn daughter, moved into a new home in South Minneapolis. We made the move for my mother's health. She required a first-floor bedroom due to her condition. Shortly after we settled in, my father, my mom's ex-husband, moved in to help with the bills. He built himself a room in the basement and stayed there. It wasn't long before strange things began happening. My father, who was an extremely early riser, usually awake between 3 and 4 a.m., often heard a baby crying from the upstairs rooms where my sister lived with her newborn. But when he went to check, he would find the baby sound asleep. One night, my sister woke up and noticed a little girl standing next to the crib in the next room. She didn't panic. Oddly, she brushed it off and went back to sleep. This happened to her twice. She never mentioned it until much later. Years later, after my sister had married and moved out with her daughter, my father had his own encounter. Early one morning, as was his routine, he stood in the doorway between the living room and dining room, gazing out the picture window at the neighborhood. Suddenly, he glanced down and saw a little girl standing beside him. Startled, he looked back, but she had vanished. After this incident, he noted that the crying from upstairs had become more frequent, even though no one lived there anymore. The odd occurrences weren't limited to family. A friend of mine moved into my old bedroom upstairs after I relocated to a different room. One night, he came home with his girlfriend, and as they pulled up to the house, they both saw someone inside the upstairs windows, appearing to board them up from the inside. When he came inside, he asked if I had been upstairs. I told him I hadn't, which puzzled him further. I delayed going to bed that night as long as possible, but when I finally went upstairs, everything was in its place. No boards, no sign of disturbance. Another eerie sighting came from my brother's girlfriend during a family gathering. She pulled into the driveway, looked up at the upstairs window, and saw a little girl standing there, waving. At the time, no one was upstairs. I had my own personal experiences in the house. A couple of years before my parents passed away, I lived there with just the two of them. Near Christmas, my mother asked me to check for a gift in a metal wardrobe in my old bedroom to make sure we didn't have a duplicate. When I went to open the cabinet, it was locked. I went to the kitchen to grab the key from the key rack by the door, but it wasn't there. I checked the bedroom and then returned to the rack, but still no key. Frustrated, I headed back to the bedroom when I stepped on something sharp and metal. The key was lying on the floor between the kitchen and the bedroom. The room had been vacuumed earlier that day, so I couldn't explain how the key ended up there. My last experience in the house was the most unsettling. After my parents passed away, my wife-to-be and I were cleaning up the debris left behind from my move. After finishing, we sat at the dining room table to talk about my family and my parents. I noticed the hall light was on, a round fluorescent light with a pull chain, and mentioned that I needed to turn it off before we left. An hour later, as we were getting ready to leave, I turned toward the hallway and saw the light was already off. Neither of us had left the table, and we were alone in the house. I walked over to the light, pulled the chain a couple of times, and confirmed it worked perfectly. That was enough for us. We left as quickly as possible. I haven't been inside the house since 1991, but it remains in the family. My sister and her husband live there now. They've told me they haven't experienced anything unusual, but I still ask from time to time. The memories of that house and its strange happenings remain vivid, even decades later. I moved into my townhouse in November 2002. I chose this house for its location. It's in my hometown, near where I grew up. The house was built in 1981, but the land had a longer history. As a child, I rode dirt bikes on trails that used to run through this area. Before that, in the 1960s, it was a sand pit owned by a large company, and before that, it was part of a sprawling farm owned by a wealthy family. The first year I lived here alone. At first, the house felt fine, but within a few months, I started to notice strange things. Late at night, I'd wake up to odd sounds. At the time, I dismissed them as typical house noises, nothing unusual. In April 2003, I decided to get 2 kittens. At the time, I was working the overnight shift and would get home around 6 a.m. Most mornings, I'd find the kittens hiding in the gap between the stove and the fridge. To keep them out, I stuffed the space with a paper towel roll. I didn't think much of it then. Months later, when the kittens had grown into cats, I came home one morning to an ear-splitting howl. I found one of my cats on the kitchen floor, every hair on her body standing on end, next to a pile of her own feces. My first thought was that the cats had been fighting, but the other cat was sitting nearby, calmly watching. For weeks after that, the howling cat would hide in the basement, wedged in a tight cubbyhole above the water heater. She was terrified of something, and it was nearly impossible to coax her out. To this day, she's unshakable during thunderstorms, dashing for her safe spot the moment she senses one. In January 2004, I came home to a flooded basement. Minnesota had been in a deep freeze for weeks, but a sudden thaw caused a water pipe leading outside to burst. A neighbor called the city while I was away, and they shut off my water just in time. When the city inspector arrived, they noted that the pipe had been barely turned off, enough for water to trickle through and eventually freeze. I was certain I had closed it completely in the fall. In August 2004, my 19-year-old nephew moved in. By then, I was working the day shift and he worked overnights. His girlfriend joined us in June 2006, and nothing strange happened while they lived here. They moved out in February 2008. In April 2008, one of my cats woke me up around 4 a.m. She was sitting at the edge of my bed, meowing persistently. I turned toward her and immediately smelled gas. One of the stove burners had been turned on without igniting. I couldn't explain it. Grateful, I thought my cat might have accidentally turned the knob and, realizing her mistake, meowed to wake me up. Either way, she may have saved my life. A few months later, in July 2008, the smoke alarm outside my bedroom went off in the middle of the night. Startled, I jumped out of bed. The alarm clock read exactly 3 a.m. I silenced the alarm and searched the house but found nothing. Unable to sleep, I noticed the same cat from April staring intently at the open doorway of my room. My bedroom is on the 3rd floor, and the doorway leads to a hallway that ends in a staircase down to the 2nd floor. The cat wouldn't stop looking out into the hallway, her gaze fixed downward. I tried petting her and picking her up, but she kept returning to the same spot, staring. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I mentioned the smoke alarm to my coworkers, emphasizing how strange it was that it went off exactly at 3 a.m. One of them told me he'd read that 3 a.m. is considered the most spiritual hour of the night. That conversation reminded me of the gas incident in April, which also happened around 3 a.m. Curious, I Googled 3 a.m. ghost and was stunned by what I found: stories and legends about the witching hour, a time associated with heightened spiritual activity. Now, as I write this, I can't help but feel a chill. It's late, and I'm in my bedroom with my door open, glancing at the hallway. Both my cats are on the bed, their eyes fixed on the doorway, just like that night. Whatever is going on, it's enough to keep me on edge. And 3 a.m.? I'm not looking forward to it. In 1989, I was 23 and attending college in Duluth, Minnesota. I lived off campus in a 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate, who is still a close friend to this day. One night, while he was out, my girlfriend and I decided to experiment with his Ouija board. Ironically, it had been a Christmas gift from his grandmother when he was 11, though he'd never used it. Neither of us had any real experience with Ouija boards, and we approached it out of curiosity rather than caution. To our surprise, the board worked almost immediately, responding to our questions with coherent and prompt answers. Fascinated, we spent hours asking mundane questions about our futures, more intrigued by the mechanism of the board than by the content of the answers. At one point, we asked the entity if it was telling the truth. That seemed to upset it. The planchette began to move faster and more forcefully, and the atmosphere in the room grew tense and angry. It vehemently denied lying, but its reaction was unsettling. Whenever we asked less challenging questions, the anger subsided. After a few hours, we ran out of questions. We thanked the entity, but we made a critical mistake. We didn't properly close the session. Neither of us had read the instructions thoroughly, and we didn't realize how important that step was. We simply put the board away and went about our lives, unaware of what we just invited into the apartment. Strange things began happening soon after. At first, it was subtle. My roommate and I frequently felt as though we were being watched, especially when we were home alone. Over time, the sensation became more oppressive, accompanied by a creeping unease that was hard to shake. Thankfully, the entity seemed bound to the apartment. It never followed us when we left. One night around 2 a.m., my roommate came home from work and saw a bright blue light emanating from the living room window. Puzzled, he went inside, but the light was gone. Instead, he was greeted by the unmistakable feeling of not being alone. Another time, my girlfriend was staying over. In the middle of the night, we were both jolted awake by an intense, unexplainable terror. There was no sound or sight of anything threatening, just an overwhelming, paralyzing fear. Neither of us could move or speak for what felt like 30 minutes. Through the fear, we both sensed the entity in the room, pacing slowly around the bed. It felt malevolent, almost gloating, as though it was feeding off our fear. Eventually, it left the room, and the terror gradually faded. My girlfriend visited much less after that. After that night, I knew things were escalating. Desperate, I began praying regularly for protection and guidance. I also researched how to properly close a Ouija session. About 4 weeks after the initial incident, I used the board alone and formally ended the session according to the instructions. While the intense activity stopped, the feeling of being watched persisted. Determined to reclaim my space, I began speaking out loud daily, thanking the entity for its original responses but firmly telling it that it was no longer welcome. Occasionally, I'd feel a wave of resentment in response, but the intensity of the presence began to wane over the following weeks. The final confrontation happened unexpectedly. One day, while sitting in my bedroom, I felt the entity's presence again, stronger than it had been in weeks. I could sense it in the corner of the room, near the window. Something in me snapped. All the fear, frustration, and anger that had been building over the weeks boiled over. In a haze of rage, I mentally lunged at the presence. In my mind's eye, I saw myself striking at it with immense force, my fists pounding on what appeared to be a shapeless, gray mist. I felt as though I was driving it back, pushing it further and further away. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I snapped back to myself and the presence was gone, this time for good. I've never experienced anything like that since. Looking back, I wonder if my guardian angel or a higher power lent me the strength to finally expel it. I'm not an angry person by nature, and that moment felt entirely out of character for me. This experience taught me a profound lesson. Ouija boards are not toys. They are powerful tools that open doors to realms we don't fully understand, and what comes through can be unpredictable and dangerous. It's far easier to open a door than to close it, especially if the entity wants to stay. If you're seeking answers or connections, I've learned that there are better ways to do so, through prayer, meditation, or other spiritual practices. Be cautious about what you invite into your life, because as my story shows, you might find more than you bargained for. I remember when I was in 6th grade, living in a new apartment complex in Dallas, Texas. We had just moved there, and at the time, my mom worked first shift while my dad worked third shift. My mom served as my alarm clock, calling each morning to wake me up so I could get my younger siblings ready for school. One morning, after my mom's call, I went to wake up my sister and told her to make sure my little brother got up too. Then I headed to the bathroom to take a shower. As I was finishing up, I noticed the bathroom doorknob twisting, like someone was trying to get in. It didn't bother me at first. I assumed it was my sister or brother being impatient. But when I grabbed the knob to open the door, it felt like whoever was on the other side was also trying to open it at the same time. When I finally opened the door, I caught a glimpse of long, straight black hair swinging to the right as someone, or something, darted toward my parents' room. I froze. The figure's hair looked just like my sister's, and it seemed to be about her height too. Startled, I thought she must have gotten scared and ran away when she saw me. At that moment, I didn't feel afraid. I felt annoyed. I followed the figure directly into my parents' room, expecting to confront her. But when I got there, my sister was still in bed, rubbing her eyes as she tried to wake up. My little brother was lying next to her, fast asleep. Confused, I asked her angrily, "Was that you just now?" She looked at me, half asleep, and said, "What are you talking about?" I snapped, "Stop playing tricks on me, or I'll tell Mom." She insisted she didn't know what I was talking about, but I didn't believe her. That evening, I told my mom about what had happened. "I saw something with long black hair, just like my sister," I explained. My mom turned to my sister and told her to stop playing around. My sister, now fully awake and clearly irritated, defended herself, swearing it wasn't her. At that point, my mom dropped the subject. But her reaction left me unsettled. She didn't seem surprised or dismissive. She just didn't want to talk about it. Years later, I brought up the incident again, asking my sister if it had really been her that morning. She swore once more that it wasn't her and insisted she wasn't trying to scare me. When I reminded my mom about it, she admitted she had always known it wasn't my sister. Curious, I pressed her for more details. "Why do little kids see things like that?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Some kids can see, feel, or hear things that others can't." Her words stayed with me. That morning's encounter felt more unsettling in hindsight, especially knowing my mom hadn't dismissed it as just a trick or my imagination. Whatever it was that I saw, it wasn't my sister, and to this day I wonder what or who it might have been. The story of the Whistler began in the spring of 2007 when we started noticing strange, inexplicable occurrences in our home in Glenville, Minnesota. Over the years, these incidents have ranged from playful pranks to unnerving experiences, leaving us both spooked and intrigued. Here are some of the key events involving our ghostly visitor. The start of the Whistler. The first incident happened when my wife was home alone in the living room, trying to take a quiet nap on the couch. I was in my basement office, our son was in his basement bedroom playing games, and our daughter was presumably in her room upstairs. My wife wasn't quite asleep when she felt a sudden tug on her shirt collar. Assuming it was our daughter teasing her, she didn't move but simply asked aloud, "What do you want?" There was no reply. Moments later, another tug pulled at the same spot. Still motionless, she repeated her question. Again silence. When a third, more forceful tug startled her, she spun around, only to find no one there. Alarmed, she got up and checked on our daughter, who was fast asleep in her room. Shaken, she came downstairs to find me, her face pale with fright. That was the beginning. Unusual happenings. From that point forward, we began experiencing unexplainable events around the house. The television would turn off and on by itself, or the channels would change while we were watching. On one particularly unnerving night, our karaoke monitor TV began falling off the speaker stand as we sang. At first, we blamed the vibrations, but as we watched, it seemed as though an unseen force pushed it over twice. The second time, I witnessed it with my own eyes. The TV tipped backward as though an invisible hand had shoved it. That incident broke the monitor, and after we replaced it, the problem never happened again. The naming of the Whistler. It wasn't until the summer of 2007 that the entity earned its name. My stepson was in the house while I was outside working, and my wife was sitting on the deck talking on the phone. As he walked through the living room, he distinctly heard someone whistling a cheerful tune. At first, he thought it was his sister playing a prank, but when he checked, he found no one. The whistling continued intermittently throughout the day, loud and clear, unsettling him enough to tell us about it. We laughed nervously and decided to nickname the entity the Whistler. Although the whistling didn't seem malicious, it left a lasting impression on my stepson, who, despite his skepticism about ghosts, couldn't explain what he heard. Encounters with the Whistler. The most recent encounter happened just a few weeks ago. It was a quiet Saturday, and I was home alone with the dogs, working in the garage with the radio playing softly. The house was silent, as my wife was at work, and the kids were with their dad. At one point, I went inside to use the bathroom. As I walked out, passing by my daughter's room, which she always keeps closed, I heard a deep male voice, crystal clear, say, "Hi." The voice was so close and startling that I froze in my tracks. Too unnerved to investigate, I quickly left the house and returned to the garage. Later, I went back to check the room. The door was still closed, and there was no sign of anyone or anything inside. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the Whistler had decided to play another trick on me. The mysterious baseball toy. One particularly odd event occurred while I was cleaning up the yard and taking trash to the burn pit. Passing one of our old sheds, which is filled with weathered belongings, I suddenly heard what sounded like a child's toy playing a baseball game. The tune of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" played, followed by a commentator's voice saying, "Up comes the batter, and he gets a hit," followed by the sound of applause. Stunned, I approached the shed, but the sound stopped. When I passed by the shed again moments later, the same sequence played again. It was strange but not threatening, so I chalked it up to an old motion-activated toy. However, when I asked my stepson about it later, he insisted he'd never owned a baseball toy like that. Even stranger, the toys in the shed had been sitting there for years, exposed to weather extremes. There was no way a toy could still be functional. Final thoughts. The Whistler's visits have been sporadic but consistent enough to leave their mark. While the events range from playful pranks to outright startling moments, we've come to accept that our unseen guest is more mischievous than malicious. Whether it's tugging at my wife's collar, changing TV channels, or whistling tunes, the Whistler seems to enjoy making its presence known. We're curious to see if it will return, and we'll continue to share our experiences as they happen. For now, we live with the understanding that not all house guests are visible, but they can certainly make themselves known. A while back, I shared a few experiences from my parents' cabin, but I realized I never mentioned this particular night in detail. It's one of the more unusual encounters I've had. Some parts almost seem cliché, but I assure you, it's completely true. My nephew, Taylor, came up from Pennsylvania for a rare visit. The last time I'd seen him, he was in preschool, and now he was a high school senior. The night before we went up to the cabin, we stayed home and spent hours talking about the strange things that had happened to us over the years. One of Taylor's stories stood out. He told me about a dream he'd had involving my dad. In the dream, Taylor walked out of his bedroom and saw Dad sitting in the living room. Even in the dream, Taylor realized this was strange because Dad had never been to his house. And, of course, Dad had passed away. Taylor said they had a great conversation, but at one point, Dad asked, "What kind of cancer do you want?" While saying this, Dad tugged on one of Taylor's ears. Taylor woke up perplexed but decided to have the ear checked out. Sure enough, doctors found the very beginnings of skin cancer, so early it wasn't even visible to the naked eye. They were able to treat it, and Taylor has been fine ever since. The next day, we headed up to the cabin. The first night was uneventful, but on the second night, Taylor convinced me to go outside and see if we could experience anything unusual. I agreed, intrigued by the idea. As soon as we stepped out, we heard a loud voice from somewhere nearby, yelling, "I'll kill you!" It sounded like someone had their TV turned up to full volume, and it startled us. Not wanting anyone to get into trouble with the boat club rules, we drove around with the windows down, trying to locate the source. Eventually, we found the house, but it was completely dark. No lights, no cars, and no one visible in the chair illuminated by the TV's glow. We decided to leave it alone, unsure how to proceed, and drove back to the cabin. Hours later, when the noise stopped, we ventured out again. This time, we noticed a strange shadow under a streetlight, like a flag fluttering in the breeze. We looked around but couldn't find anything that could have caused it. Curious, we kept exploring. Finally, we reached a wooden walkway with a couple of streetlights alongside it. I wasn't even sure if the walkway was finished, but Taylor and I decided to see where it led. We joked and teased each other as we walked, but then we heard a thump further ahead. It sounded like something hitting the wooden boards. Concerned for Taylor's safety, I told him to stay put while I went to check. This happened a few more times. Each time I heard the noise, investigated, and found nothing. But on my way back to Taylor, I noticed something strange. An orb of green light under one of the streetlights. The light was dimming, and the orb seemed to hover behind Taylor. I called him over quietly, not wanting to alarm him, and pointed it out. The orb was about the size of a volleyball, glowing green. Above us, another orb floated in the air, moving in a figure-8 or infinity pattern. Taylor saw it too, and as adrenaline kicked in, we both started running. Despite our physical differences, I kept pace with him, my heart racing. When we reached the car, I realized Taylor had been saying something over and over. It wasn't until we were safely inside that I understood what he was saying. "This is so cool." Afterward, I couldn't help but wonder, was the green orb my dad? I've heard that green is a healing color, and it struck me that Taylor and I never got a chance to say goodbye to him. If that orb was Dad, it felt like he was reaching out to us. But that raised another question. If the green orb was Dad, what was the one in the sky? Later, I walked the full length of the walkway with a neighbor who'd come up to the cabin. To our surprise, the walkway ended abruptly at a farmer's field. It seemed odd. This was near the lake, and I didn't even know there were farmers in the area. Now I'm left wondering, what are the odds that this was Dad? And if not, does anyone else have a theory about what we experienced? I don't think the earlier incidents with the loud TV or the shadow were connected to the walkway, but I'm open to interpretations. My childhood home was built in 1959 in the Detroit, Michigan suburb now known as Dearborn Heights. 4 years later, in 1963, my family moved in as soon as construction was complete. I was conceived in this house. My mother, while pregnant with me, felt uneasy in the basement but couldn't explain why. This was unusual because the basement was fully finished, with wood paneling, a built-in TV, and a stereo system, making it the family's favorite spot to unwind every evening. It's hard to pinpoint when the strange occurrences began, but odd events were a constant presence in our home. Both family members and visitors reported experiences, most centered in the basement. Occasionally, though, my sisters, my mother, and others witnessed a green orb or shadow move through the upstairs hallway. A haunted history. My oldest sister experienced the most paranormal activity, while I had the least. One night, when she was babysitting my middle sister and me, she and her friend were watching TV in the basement when they heard the dishwasher upstairs banging open and shut. My other sister and I were fast asleep, and no one else was home. Other incidents were just as perplexing. On several occasions, what looked like a 4th of July sparkler was seen in the basement laundry room, far from any electrical outlets. Banging noises were often heard, many coming from my father's darkroom, where he developed photos as an amateur photographer. Disembodied voices were also reported. In one instance, my oldest sister and her friend were headed downstairs when they heard adults having a full conversation in the basement. Upon investigation, they confirmed the TV and stereo were off, leaving no explanation for the sounds. Both my parents had experiences as well. My father, however, didn't admit to them until he was in his 70s, and even then he never shared details. Our neighbor boys had their own fright, One summer, while watering our houseplants during a family vacation, they were so spooked they refused ever to be alone in our house again. Victorian man and my limited experiences. My oldest sister often saw the figure of a man dressed in Victorian-era clothing upstairs, near her bedroom. I, on the other hand, experienced less. One recurring event involved my dad's darkroom, which was directly below the bedroom I shared with my middle sister. Through a furnace vent, we could talk to Dad while he worked, and we knew the familiar sounds of his process, like the clinking of his metal chemical trays. But on many nights, we'd wake up to hear those same sounds echoing from the darkroom, even when Dad was fast asleep across the hall. The furnace wasn't running, and we didn't have central air. These bumps in the night were never explained. One particular incident happened during a Halloween sleepover. My friends and I had turned the basement's furnace room into a makeshift haunted house, complete with decorations, including a broom hanging from the ceiling. That night, I woke up to a knocking sound coming from the furnace room. I checked to see that all my friends were still asleep and confirmed my family remained upstairs. The next day, I tested scenarios to recreate the noise and found that only a significant force could make the broom hit the wall and produce that knocking sound. At 14, I decided to move my bedroom into the basement for more privacy, a decision my oldest sister still doesn't understand. After the move, I didn't have any major experiences, but I refused to open my eyes in the dark if I woke during the night. I'd only feel safe after turning on the light, and even then, I was hesitant to switch it off again. We moved out a few months later. Lingering questions. I often wonder if being conceived in that house made me somewhat immune to its occurrences. I've researched the property and found no evidence of tragic events or accidents. However, the area may have been part of a Civil War-era military reserve, though no battles were fought in Michigan. The Chippewa and Ottawa Native American tribes also once inhabited the region, but I found no specific connections. Interestingly, while our neighbors have stayed in their homes for nearly 40 years, our former house has changed hands repeatedly. A neighbor counted on both hands the number of families that have moved in and out since we left. Whether they, too, encountered strange activity is something I can only speculate about. Ouija board adventures. As kids, we did own a Ouija board, which we always used in the basement, naturally, because that's where the ghosts seemed to be. We believed we contacted entities, though the sessions often ended with us running upstairs screaming. I can't recall specific names or messages from those sessions, but the memories still linger as part of the house's strange history. Just before my freshman year of college, I had an experience I'll never forget. It's been so long now, after all, I'm a retired great-grandma, but I'll recount it as best as I can. Some details may be fuzzy, but the core of it is clear as day. Back in high school, my father lost his job in Flint, Michigan. After nearly a year of unemployment, he finally found work near Detroit, so my family moved to Ferndale, a Detroit suburb. I decided not to move with them and instead began my independent life at 17 with just $10 in my pocket and a rented room. I supported myself as a waitress in downtown Flint and worked hard to save for college. By late summer of 1967, I had earned enough through scholarships and part-time work to start school that fall. Before heading to college, I spent a couple of weeks visiting my family at their new home in Ferndale. It was my first time staying there, and I brought along my loyal dog, Baron, a German Shepherd/Malamute mix. Their house was small, a cozy white arts and craft-style home in a family-oriented neighborhood. It had a glassed-in porch at the entrance, leading to a living room and dining area. The kitchen was straight ahead, and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom were on the first floor. The attic, accessed by a staircase in the back bedroom, was unfinished and sparsely furnished with a few storage boxes and my dad's old desk. This attic was where I was supposed to sleep during my stay. From the moment I stepped into the attic, I felt uneasy. The space was nearly empty. No clutter, no dark corners where anything could hide. Yet something about it didn't feel right. Baron seemed fine at first, curling up on a blanket next to my cot. I read for a while before turning off the single overhead bulb and drifting off to sleep. Not long after, I was jolted awake by Baron's low, rumbling growl. The attic was pitch dark, but I could hear heavy footsteps and a man's voice moving toward my cot. As I lay frozen, an image appeared vividly in my mind. An older man, maybe in his 50s, dressed in work clothes like a custodian or handyman. His face was bright red with anger as he shouted a stream of curses, along with something like, "This is my place. Get out." Baron leapt to his feet, barking furiously at the unseen intruder. I fumbled for the string to turn on the light, and when the bulb illuminated the attic, the room was empty. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. Baron and I spent the rest of the night on the living room sofa. The next morning, my mother casually mentioned that my father had also experienced an unfriendly presence in the attic, so much so that he stopped using his desk up there. "Thanks for the heads up, Dad." From that night onward, my mother decided to move my younger brother, who slept in the back bedroom, to the living room sofa so I could use his room instead. The next evening, Baron and I settled into my brother's room. Although I was nervous, I managed to fall asleep, but once again we were interrupted. This time, we heard heavy footsteps thudding down the attic stairs. Baron sprang up on the bed, barking and growling, as if tracking something invisible moving around the room. I couldn't see anything, but I heard the same voice from the previous night. The image of the angry man in coveralls popped into my head again, shouting obscenities and demanding that we leave. Baron's barks followed the unseen presence as it seemed to move toward the hallway door and disappear. My whole family was awake by now, thanks to the commotion. After that, Baron and I slept in the utility room for the rest of my visit. Later, my mother shared what she and my father had learned about the house. A previous owner had been a custodian at a local school. He was described as a loner, fiercely protective of his property, and prone to shouting profanities at anyone who came too close. Tragically, he was killed in a boiler explosion at the school. Despite my father and I not having the best relationship, we were able to talk about the ghost. He even tested my psychic sensitivity by handing me a cigarette lighter and asking me to describe what I saw when I focused on it. I saw things I didn't feel comfortable sharing and quickly ended the game. Although my father and I could barely talk about anything else, paranormal experiences became the one thing we could discuss. This shared understanding of the unseen was an odd but meaningful connection for us, even if the attic ghost wasn't exactly the warmest housemate. Many of you have commented on my previous stories, saying that the ghostly activity I've been experiencing might stop when I turn 18 or 19. I trust that, and honestly, I can't wait for these house guests to leave me alone. In the meantime, though, I've been keeping track of the strange occurrences, almost like studying them. After I posted my last story, the activity seemed to die down. For a little while, I didn't hear any strange noises or feel any strange presences in the house. I thought maybe they'd finally moved on. I felt relieved, but I was wrong. It started again a couple of days ago, February 28, 2016. I remember being startled awake around 1 a.m. by a loud bang, like someone had fallen. My brain wasn't fully awake, so I didn't think much of it until the morning. I asked my parents and my brother if they'd heard anything, but they hadn't. I even asked my brother if he'd fallen out of bed. But again, nothing. That's when I started thinking that the spirits were back. I've started to notice patterns in the activity. The times it happens, 10 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., the areas of the house and what I see or feel. Most of the time, I'm alone when things happen, and it's almost always at night. For example, I'll be in the back room watching TV or playing a game before bed, and I'll hear or feel someone behind me or catch movement out of the corner of my eye. The back room has a door I can shut to keep my pets out, so I know it's not them causing any of this. Then, at night, when it's completely dark and I'm trying to sleep, I see shadows of people in my room. I know what you're probably thinking. It's just my imagination. But let me ask you this. Does your imagination tug on your blankets or reach out and touch your face? Because that's what these shadows have done to me. Recently, around 10 p.m., I rolled over and saw a dark shadow standing by my bedside. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I hid under the blankets like a little kid. What else could I do? I couldn't just walk into my parents' room and tell them there was a shadowy figure standing by my bed. While I was hiding, I started hearing noises, like scraping. I keep 5 angel figurines on my bedside table, hoping they'll protect me. The noises eventually stopped, and I managed to get a little sleep. But in the morning, I noticed something unsettling. All my angel figurines had moved. They were closer to me, nearly hanging off the edge of the table. I can't stop thinking about it. It really freaked me out. The next night was even worse. This time I saw not one shadow but two. The first stood by my bedside again, just staring. I pulled the blanket up to my face, leaving only my eyes exposed. Suddenly, I saw the second shadow. It was above me, like it had climbed onto my bed frame and was watching me from above. I couldn't see any faces, just the blackness of their forms, but it was terrifying. I didn't sleep at all that night. I really want this to stop. Sometimes they seem to leave me alone, but then the activity starts all over again. And while I've heard that things should calm down when I turn 18 or 19, I'm still 5 months away from my 18th birthday, and nothing is slowing down. My story began when I was 12 years old. I was lying in bed, asleep, when I suddenly woke up, or at least I think I did. The first thing I noticed was the overwhelming smell of a burning campfire. Then I saw it, an 8.5-foot tall figure standing before me. It looked like it was made of static, the kind you see on a TV screen when there's no signal. The static inside the figure shifted and moved, and though I was paralyzed, I wasn't immediately afraid, just in shock. That moment burned itself into my memory. The towering static figure and the smell of smoke filling the air. The next night I woke again. This time, a black shadowy figure, 8 to 9 feet tall, appeared. As soon as I saw it, an intense wave of fear consumed me. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Pure, condensed terror. The figure seemed intelligent, radiating an energy that felt malicious, like it was feeding on my fear. The following 2 nights, the black figure returned. On these nights, I felt it shaking me violently, though my body remained frozen. Along with the shaking, I heard the relentless sound of a train. It wasn't just fear I felt. There was a sense that the figure was deriving satisfaction from my terror, as if it enjoyed tormenting me. These encounters continued for 4 years. Nearly every week, I would wake up to some form of this horrifying presence. For years, I searched for answers and eventually settled on the idea that it might be chronic sleep paralysis. But even with this explanation, the experiences were no less terrifying. At 17, I experienced something different. I was sleeping at a friend's house after a group hangout. When I opened my eyes, I was engulfed in a piercing light blue glow. In front of me stood 7 figures, each one warped and distorted. Their faces were fragmented, stuck in strange expressions, shock, strain, and emotionless stares. None of them looked fully human. They stood in a line, tallest on the right, descending to the shortest. The tallest one spoke, saying, "We are the relatives." Its voice was otherworldly, like a low suction that made my insides feel hollow. The encounter lasted only 20 seconds before I fully woke up, but it left a lasting impression. In my 20s, the experiences became less visual and more auditory. I'd lie down and hear voices, often right next to my ear. It was like turning a radio dial, static, a pause, and then a low male voice would speak. Sometimes it was laughter. Other times it called my name. The voices always carried a distinct energy, as if they had a personality, but they didn't feel human. I sought help from professionals. Over the years, I saw 5 psychiatrists and 2 psychologists. None of them found evidence of a mental disorder beyond depression. I also turned to religion at times, and whether by placebo or genuine faith, belief in God brought me some peace. Every doctor's visit confirmed that I was physically healthy. No blood sugar issues, no serious illnesses. By the time I reached 30, the experiences had evolved into something even more unsettling. About a year ago, I began practicing meditation, hoping to find inner peace. Instead, I started having visions, scenes that would suddenly take over my mind, even when I was wide awake. These visions always involved someone I knew and seemed to have a spiritual element. They were vivid, filled with faded bright colors, and surreal. The most haunting event happened about 4 months ago. I became lucid during a dream and found myself swimming at the bottom of a pool. Across from me sat a man or a creature. His skin was white, and his eyes were burnt out of his face. The image was incredibly vivid, and it stayed with me. Weeks later, while I was at a park, I had my first confirmed waking encounter with spirits. I saw transparent figures, like the bottoms of dresses from the 1700s, moving in a circle with the wind. I smelled burning, though there was no fire nearby. As I watched, I heard a voice in my head, "I orchestrate them." When I turned, I saw him again, the man with the burnt-out eyes. This was the breaking point. Overwhelmed and feeling hopeless, I attempted suicide by pill overdose. As you can guess, I survived. I've spent years studying psychology, earning a BA in the field, in hopes of understanding what's wrong with me. But I still don't know. My first encounter with the unexplained happened when I was about 10 years old. I was with my dad, which was already unusual because my parents are divorced and he lived in another country. His surprise visit to my house was exciting, and I wanted to show him everything, including my favorite spot, a big tree in the woods near our home. The tree was a popular climbing spot for the neighborhood kids, and I wanted to show my dad how high I could climb. We walked along the wooded path to the tree, with brittle leaves crunching loudly underfoot. My dad, who is 6 feet 2 inches, could almost reach the tree's low branches, while I could duck comfortably beneath them. As we approached, I pointed out the tree to my dad. When I turned back to look, I saw a figure sitting on one of the branches. It was blurry, like a memory coming to life. The figure looked like a young boy with bright red hair, a red t-shirt, pleated blue jeans, maybe 80s style, and red Converse sneakers. He had his back turned to us. We stopped in our tracks, staring silently. Then the boy pushed off the branch. We heard the sound of him landing and running away, but we didn't actually see him land or move. It was strange. There was nowhere to hide, and a bright red shirt would have been impossible to miss in the brown woods. That was my first encounter. The second encounter happened around the same age in my bedroom. I don't remember what woke me up, but when I became fully aware, I realized my hands were floating. It sounds ridiculous, but I wasn't moving them. They felt like they were being held by someone else. The sensation was impossible to describe. The hands weren't warm or cold, and they didn't have texture. They were just there. Panicked, I pulled my hands free and hid them under my back beneath the covers. The presence tried to take my hands again, but once they were hidden, it stopped. Whatever it was, it never touched me again after that. The third encounter came when I was 14, living in a new house. My 14th birthday fell on a Friday the 13th, and I joked with my friends about it being an unlucky year. A few weeks later, I noticed something strange. The drawers in my dresser started opening by themselves. It was always the bottom drawer, no matter what I did to test it. Then I began hearing footsteps in my room at night, along with the sound of rustling paper. My mom once witnessed the fireplace tools move on their own, with the fire iron swinging slightly as if nudged. One night, I found a rosary my dad had left behind and pinned it to my board without thinking much of it. That same night, I woke to the entity touching me. It started with my right foot, stretching and moving it as though it wasn't under my control. Then, it touched my hand and possibly my head. I can't remember all the details, as I was half asleep. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was in my room, and the closet door was wide open. I could sense the entity inside. It felt darker and heavier than the rest of the room. I tried to close the door, but as I did, the entity clawed at my back and pulled me away. Terrified, I ran to my mom for help, but she was in the next room and said she couldn't help me right then. I returned to my room and tried to close the door again, but the dream ended before I succeeded. When I woke, I could still feel a tingling sensation on my back where it had scratched me, but there were no marks. Eventually, I told a friend who claimed to be Wiccan. She performed a ritual to remove the entity, saying she'd brought it to her house instead. For a while, things quieted down, but months later, the signs returned. This time, the presence felt darker and less human, with a heavy and oppressive energy. It didn't touch me but gave me one of the worst nightmares I'd ever had. In the dream, I was being chased down a hallway by the entity. I dove into a large, cockpit-like room with two pilots. One was knocked over as the entity pursued me. I jumped onto a bed, pressing against the wall to get as far away as possible. Then the dream shifted. The room disappeared, replaced by the image of a face. Its skin was ashen gray, its lips were gone, and its mouth was a vivid, almost blood red. I woke with a start, and before I opened my eyes, I heard a voice whisper right in my ear, "Hi, Rowan." I ran to the kitchen and waited for my mom to wake up, too scared to go back to bed. Later, I moved to my dad's house in the UK, and I thought the entity had stayed behind. But one day, my little brother, who has Asperger's syndrome, came running upstairs screaming. He told my stepmom that I had stood in the doorway and laughed in a creepy way. I was upstairs the whole time. Another time, while babysitting, I heard noises downstairs even though the house was locked, and my dog wasn't barking. I armed myself with a baseball bat and checked every corner, but nothing was there. Later, I heard footsteps on the tile floor. They didn't stop until my dad arrived home. The presence seemed tied to me. Doors opened and closed on their own when I was in my room. Once, while showering, I heard a loud bang on the door. My dad heard it too, but we never found a source. What's strangest is that none of this happens to anyone else in my family. It only happens to me. I'm extremely skeptical about the paranormal. I tend to chalk things up to coincidence or odd explanations, but I can't deny there's a part of me that's curious. And after living in our current home, that curiosity has grown. The house I share with my husband and two kids has been in his family since the early 1970s. His father originally bought it as a bachelor pad, and they call it Manderson. Built in 1928, it's an old lake cottage, worn and a bit beaten up, but full of charm. We loved the house and the neighborhood so much that we bought it from my in-laws, adding a new section to give us more space. When my husband and I first started dating 8 years ago, the house was more of a hangout spot. No one lived there. He and his friends would use it for lake access and parties, nothing more. Early on, he brought me to meet his friends there, and a couple of them shared stories about strange things they'd experienced. One night, they were playing cards in the living room when they all heard someone sneeze in the kitchen, except no one was in the kitchen. His dad also claimed that furniture would move and lights would turn on by themselves when he lived there. He joked that it was the ghost of Mr. McCloud. I laughed it off at the time. That is, until the weird things started happening to me. Weirdness number 1. The toy that wouldn't die. In 2007, shortly after we moved in, my daughter received a rescue pet swim to me puppy as a gift. It was a battery-operated dog that could swim in the tub. She was thrilled at first, but like so many toys, it turned out to be junk. It worked once or twice before it completely stopped functioning. We replaced the batteries, dried it out, nothing worked. Online reviews confirmed it wasn't just us. Some people reported theirs wouldn't stop running, while others, like ours, died after a couple of uses. My daughter lost interest, but for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. So it sat on the tile bench in the bathroom for about a year. Fast forward to late 2008 or early 2009. It was around 5 a.m., and I was in the shower washing my hair. Out of nowhere, I heard a loud robotic walking sound. I turned, and sure enough, the toy was walking across the tile. I was stunned. This thing hadn't worked in over a year. I picked it up and tried turning it off with the on-off button, but it wouldn't stop. I grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen to remove the batteries, and as soon as I placed the screwdriver on the first screw, the toy shut off on its own. Curious, I tried turning it back on, but it was completely dead again. I put it back on the tile bench and returned to my shower. A few minutes later, it started walking again. This time, I skipped the button and went straight for the screwdriver. As soon as I touched the screw, it stopped. That was the last straw. I threw the thing down the basement stairs and had my husband get rid of it later. Weirdness number 2. The knock. One early morning, I was in the bathroom putting on makeup when I heard 3 distinct knocks on the door. Assuming it was my husband or daughter, I put down my mascara and opened the door. No one was there. I checked the bedrooms and they were both sound asleep. Another early morning around 6 a.m., I was in the kitchen packing lunches. The house was quiet. Everyone else was still asleep. I had a show playing quietly on my tablet. Suddenly, I heard a sneeze behind me. Startled, I whipped around, but no one was there. The bedrooms are on the other side of the house, and the cats definitely don't sneeze like a man. I still can't explain it. Weirdness number 4. The babysitting incident. This one happened while I wasn't home. My sister was babysitting while my husband and I attended a charity dinner. Midway through the evening, our neighbor called to let us know she was heading over to our house because the girls were too scared to stay there alone. According to my sister, she and the kids were watching YouTube videos on the computer when the dimmer light in the kitchen turned on by itself. Spooked, they went next door to the neighbor's house until help arrived. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard about it. While I've experienced other odd things over the years, they happen so infrequently that I tend to forget about them. Maybe I'll look into the history of the house one day. After all, it's nearly 100 years old. If there are ghosts here, they seem pretty harmless. At least Mr. McCloud or whoever or whatever it is keeps to themselves most of the time. When I was 8, my family moved from California to a small town in Michigan called Paw Paw. My dad's job in management often required us to relocate, and this was just one of many moves we made for his career. Paw Paw, nestled between Kalamazoo and Lake Michigan in southwest Michigan, is a charming little town known for its wineries. But beneath its picturesque surface, Paw Paw has a reputation for the strange and unexplained, what we now call paranormal activity, though back then, we just called them hauntings. Beyond its paranormal reputation, Paw Paw also had a surprisingly high rate of suicides, which added to the town's peculiar atmosphere. Looking back, I can't help but feel the place had an unsettling undercurrent that went beyond what we could see. My parents bought a lovely ranch-style home on the outskirts of town. It was in a quiet neighborhood with houses spaced out between fields and old barns. Across the road were endless hay fields, giving it a country feel even though it was technically a subdivision. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect home. But almost immediately, strange things started happening. We all, except for my dad, who refused to acknowledge anything out of the ordinary, felt an intense sense of being watched. My brother and I had bedrooms right next to each other, with our parents' room down the hall. I had never been afraid to sleep alone before, but in that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was always watching me. On top of that, there were the unexplainable noises. One night, I lay in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard whispering coming from my closet. It wasn't just a whisper. It sounded more like chanting. Hoping it was my brother playing a prank, I yelled at him to stop. My mom heard me shouting and came to check on me. She found my brother fast asleep in his room and nothing unusual in my closet. She tried to reassure me that it was just my imagination, but I knew what I heard. After she left, I lay flat on my back with the covers pulled up to my nose, trying not to listen for more noises. Suddenly, I heard the floor creak at the foot of my bed, and the sheets tightened around my feet as if someone had just sat on the edge of the bed. I felt the weight shift the mattress clear as day. Terrified, I screamed for my mom. She rushed in and froze when she saw the distinct indentation where someone, or something, had been sitting. She didn't say much, just told me I could sleep with her and my dad that night. Years later, while reminiscing about all the places we'd lived, my mom admitted she had seen the indentation and had her own share of experiences in that house. One frigid winter evening, my mom had made dinner and was keeping it warm on the stove while we waited for my dad to come home. It was already dark, and my brother had the bright idea to turn off all the lights to scare my dad when he walked through the door. We sat quietly in the flickering glow of the fireplace, stifling giggles as we waited. To break the silence, I jokingly yelled, "If there are any ghosts in this house, let us know you're here." The response was instant. A deafening crash echoed from my parents' bedroom, like a grand piano had fallen and hit the floor. We even heard the distinct sound of piano keys. The vibration shook the living room floor. My mom, startled, jumped up and turned on the lights. We all cautiously made our way to their bedroom, only to find everything perfectly in place. Not a single thing had been disturbed. My mom turned to me with a stern look and said, "Don't ever say anything like that again." At the opposite end of the house was a large bonus room we used for laundry and extra living space. One day, while we were at school and my dad was at work, my mom went in to iron clothes. She turned on the radio and got to work. Without warning, the radio started changing stations on its own. Then, as she was ironing, she felt two strong tugs on the back of her shirt. Whipping around, she expected to find her shirt caught on something, but there was nothing behind her. She shut off the iron and hurried to our neighbor's house, visibly shaken. When my mom hinted at what had happened, our neighbor didn't seem surprised. She told my mom that both our house and hers were haunted. She even mentioned that something felt off about the whole town. According to her, a man had committed suicide in our house, and the previous owner of her home, a woman, had hung herself in the garage, leaving behind a husband and 4 young children. She went on to say that Pawpaw had a troubling history of suicides. After that, my mom told my dad she wanted to leave the house and the town altogether. About a year later, we moved, though it took several years to sell the house. Looking back, I still feel a chill when I think about those experiences. Whatever was in that house, and in that town, left a lasting impression on all of us, even my dad, though he'd never admit it. My experience took place at an old trading post in my town. The town I live in is very focused on its historical roots, hosting numerous events and recreations throughout the year to celebrate the past. I mention this because someone later suggested that what I saw might have been connected to those reenactments, though I'm not sure I agree. I wasn't alone when this happened. My cousin, whom I'll call M, was with me. One night, for no real reason, we decided to visit the trading post. We'd both been there countless times before, but always during the day, as places like this have curfews. Parks and historical sites in my town aren't technically open at night, so we knew we could get in trouble if caught. The trading post is set up with a creek running through the area. On one side of the creek is the trading post itself, and on the other side are a house, a schoolhouse, and a barn. A bridge connects the two sides. That night, we headed up to the bridge and immediately noticed how eerily silent it was. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, the wind, were absent, which gave the place an unsettling vibe. Still, M and I continued across the bridge. But just as we were about to fully cross, we both saw it. A figure stood next to a wagon, positioned right by the barn. Neither of us spoke. We just froze and stared. The figure moved back and forth, pacing on the other side of the wagon. Then, it stopped and stood motionless beside the barn. Suddenly, it vanished, right in front of us, only to reappear on the opposite side of the wagon, closer to us. That's when the fear really kicked in. The figure seemed to turn toward us, and then it started walking in our direction. That was enough for M and me. We bolted, running back to the car as fast as we could. When we finally got back to the car, we were out of breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. As we described the figure to each other, we realized we had seen the exact same thing. We even finished each other's sentences. The figure was completely black, with no discernible facial features. It wore what looked like knee-high boots, a jacket that ended just above the boots, and a top hat. Something about it gave me the impression it was male, though I can't say for sure. The next day, I went back to the trading post during daylight to look for any clues that could explain what we'd seen. I wanted to find the wagon we'd seen the night before, but it wasn't there. There had been heavy rain overnight, but I couldn't find any wheel marks or evidence of a wagon having been there at all. Later, I asked a friend and her boyfriend to come back with me. I didn't tell them what M and I had experienced because I didn't want to influence them. As soon as we got to the bridge, we all started hearing footsteps. On the grass, on the wooden planks of the bridge, all around us. We hadn't even made it halfway across before we panicked and ran back to the car. It wasn't until we were safely driving away that I told them what had happened with M and me. To this day, I refuse to visit that place at night, no matter how many people are with me. When I told my parents about the experience, my mom suggested it might have been a convict running from the police. I couldn't help but laugh at that explanation. There's no way a convict would vanish and reappear like that. My dad thought it might have been a ghost, though I'm not sure if he truly believed me. Another family member suggested it could have been one of the reenactors, But how would they have removed the wagon without leaving any wheel marks? I still don't know exactly what we saw that night, but I'm open to the idea that it could have been something paranormal. Whatever it was, it left an impression on me that I won't forget. When I bought this property a couple of years ago, one of its biggest selling points was the woods. Between the house and the road lies a stretch of red pine, covering about 5 acres. The trees, standing 35 to 40 feet tall, create an eerie yet beautiful landscape. Walking through the thick bed of pine needles feels soft and springy, like stepping into another world. Behind the house, the land becomes more wild. A mix of trees, a creek, and a narrow winding path just wide enough for a small utility vehicle. The kids and I have loved exploring the woods. Over time, we've built a small wooden bridge across the creek, set up a rope swing, and created winding paths for their battery-powered vehicles. Last year, during one of our adventures, we stumbled upon a large pile of rocks deep in the woods. The pile was about 10 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 3 feet tall, with rocks ranging in size from handheld stones to ones larger than a bowling ball. We couldn't resist digging into the pile, imagining we might uncover buried treasure. Instead, we only found more rocks. The pile extended deep into the ground, so we eventually gave up. Looking back, I wonder if disturbing that pile might have been a mistake. Not long after, strange events began unfolding in the house. At the time, my wife and I shared these experiences with friends and family, and stories about the property's history started to surface. The more people talked, the more unsettling details came to light. One account came from my wife's sister and her husband. The husband recalled that the previous owner of the house never cut wood from the pines, despite having a wood stove as the main source of heat, and refused to hunt in the woods. He shared one story but claimed he couldn't remember the other two, which makes me suspect he either didn't want to scare us or just didn't want to revisit them. I also spoke to a friend, Bert, who has hunted these woods for years. Bert recounted eerie encounters he's had, as well as stories from other hunters. He said many have seen the silhouette of a man walking through the woods, but when they approach, the figure vanishes. Others have seen a small, floating light, about the size of a credit card, darting through the trees. Bert himself once experienced something chilling. While hunting from a tree stand before sunrise, he noticed a light at the base of his tree. Thinking it was a person, he called out, but got no reply. Growing irritated, he climbed down to confront whoever it was. As he descended, the light moved away. Bert chased it for about 40 yards before it vanished completely. Standing there in the thick fog, he suddenly felt debris, leaves and twigs, falling from above. Then, a powerful gust of wind nearly knocked him over. Bert swore off hunting alone after that. Another friend, a volunteer firefighter, shared his experience from 5 or 6 years ago. His crew was called out to the property for a fire that had engulfed half the house. No one was home, and the cause of the fire was never determined. While on site, the firefighter glimpsed someone standing at the edge of the woods, watching. When he turned to investigate, the figure was gone. He described the woods as having an unshakable, eerie presence. Most recently, a coworker of mine, Billy, offered to help with a raccoon problem we'd been having. 2 raccoons had already killed several of our chickens, so Billy and his friend planned to camp out near the chicken coop late one night. Armed with flashlights and firearms, they arrived around 8:30 p.m. and began their patrol. Within 10 minutes, they texted me that they'd already caught a large raccoon in the abandoned camper. Afterward, they moved into the pine woods. As they ventured deeper into the trees, they heard the sound of branches snapping and needles crunching. They initially thought it was a coyote, but the noises grew louder and seemed to come from multiple directions. When they noticed tracks in the snow, they realized they might have stumbled upon a den. Feeling surrounded, they decided to retreat. After regrouping at the house, Billy and his friend insisted on checking out the backwoods. Despite my warnings about stories tied to those woods, they assured me they'd be fine. 10 minutes later, I received another text, "We're leaving." When they returned to the house, they were pale and visibly shaken. Billy explained that while walking the path, they felt as though they were being watched. A loud branch cracked behind them, but when they turned with their flashlights, they found nothing, No movement, no broken branches. Then, Billy spotted a glowing white figure, roughly 5 feet tall, hovering in the air. It moved so quickly that it blurred and disappeared. Moments later, they heard crunching branches behind them again. The figure reappeared twice more, each time closer than before. That's when they decided to leave. Billy shared the story with coworkers who mostly laughed it off. One coworker, however, expressed interest in investigating the woods himself. Billy and this new partner, Steve, are planning to go back in early April, armed with flashlights and determination. In the meantime, I spoke to a friend online who suggested a bizarre possibility, that the entity might be a dark fairy from folklore. She described a being that guards woods and scavenges bones from dead animals, typically leaving humans alone but known to toy with them. She proposed testing the theory by leaving a chicken bone as bait and seeing if it disappears. While intriguing, I'm more inclined to think it's a ghost than a fairy. But who knows? For now, I'm keeping an open mind. Whatever is out there in those woods remains a mystery. My story takes place in August 1961, during a humid and sweltering summer night in central Michigan. I was home on leave after basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, visiting my mother in her newly rented Victorian-style home. The heat and humidity made sleep nearly impossible, especially in the upstairs bedroom where I was staying. With no air conditioning, I found myself making repeated trips to the bathroom, trying to pass the restless hours. The house was illuminated by the light of a bright harvest moon, which made it easy to move through the hallways without turning on the lights. On one such trip, as I returned to my room, something caught my attention. There, on the staircase, I saw a woman in a formal satin gown, slowly ascending one step at a time. Her dress whispered softly with each movement, the fabric swishing against itself in the stillness of the house. She seemed entirely out of place, her attire reminiscent of the 18th century. I was spellbound, completely captivated by what I was seeing. It wasn't fear that held me, it was curiosity. I knew it wasn't my mother. This woman was shorter, fuller in figure, and bore no resemblance to her. As she climbed the stairs, she seemed equally intrigued by me, though something about her demeanor felt otherworldly. What struck me most were her eyes. There were no pupils, no irises, only white orbs that shone faintly in the moonlight. She never met my gaze directly. Instead, she seemed to focus intently on my chest, as though she was scanning something deeper, something within me. The encounter was utterly silent, yet I felt as though a wordless communication passed between us. I could sense her trying to understand me, to discern if we were connected in some way. After what felt like minutes but could have been seconds, it seemed she concluded we were strangers. Without hesitation, she turned and began descending the stairs. Halfway down, she vanished, melting seamlessly into the wall. The next morning, I recounted the experience to my mother. Her reaction left me stunned. Her face turned pale as she confessed that she had heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs for weeks, but hadn't mentioned it to anyone because my sister dismissed her claims as nonsense. That same day, my mother made arrangements to move out of the house, and as far as I know, none of us ever encountered the woman again. I have thought about that night many times over the years. Back then, I was nearly an agnostic, prone to explaining away ghost stories as quirks of perception or physics. But seeing this apparition with my own eyes changed me. It opened my mind to possibilities I'd dismissed before. As I've grown older and closer to my own eventual spiritual journey, I've become more interested in the stories of others who have encountered spirits. I'm wary of sensationalized tales designed to instill fear. What's the point of adding to humanity's already profound existential anxiety? Death is inevitable for all of us. We should approach it with honesty and understanding, not fear. My encounter led me to explore the writings of ancient traditions. One book that left a lasting impression was the Tibetan Book of the Dead, written by the sacred monk Padmasambhava in the 8th century. Tibetan Buddhists believe in an intermediate state between life and death, a realm they call the bardo. In this state, souls transitioning from the physical world can experience intense psychological states, ranging from bliss to fear. Some souls, paralyzed by terror, become trapped, wandering in the vast wasteland of samsara, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Years after my ghostly encounter, I had a near-death experience, NDE, after being wounded in Vietnam. That moment further cemented my belief that consciousness doesn't end with the body. In the absence of physical pain, the mind becomes acutely aware, and its state, whether blissful or tormented, is shaped by its psychological condition. I'll save the details of my NDE for another time, but suffice it to say, it deepened my understanding of the nature of life and death. Buddhists teach that life itself is an illusion, much like a wave rising and falling back into the ocean. While the wave appears to be a separate entity, it was never truly apart from the sea. In the same way, our individual lives are merely a crest in the vast expanse of existence. In death, we return to the source, reminding us that we were never truly separate after all.